All right. At this time, we'll call this meeting to order. Let me first of all say that we appreciate each and every person that's here today and the amount of interest that's showed here. We appreciate, we have several other legislators that are here today. We appreciate them showing up, as well as our DOT board members that are here today. We thank them for coming as well. And we want to try to get this thing started so that we can move forward and try to stay on schedule. With that being said, I'm going to introduce several members that are here on the House side, and then I'm going to let Chairman Gooch introduce his members as well. We have Representative John Burns, Chairman Burns. We have, I think, Chairman England is here. Chairman Hamilton, where are you? There he is. And the Dean of the House, Calvin Smyrie, is here today as well. And the citizen appointee is former Minority Whip Ed Lindsey. So we appreciate them. Our House staff is majority. It depends on who you ask at the time and what issue was going on. Tracy is our staff person that's here, as well as Abby, and Rick is here from Legislative Council. We also have, where's Halen? Is here from the Metro Atlanta Chamber. Chris Clark is not able to be here today, but Michael Sullivan is sitting in from the Georgia Chamber. GMA, is Lamar here? Lamar's not. No. I don't see him. And of course, Ross King down here from ACCG. We appreciate them. We'll announce toward the end of the day the schedule for the rest of the meetings. We are authorized to have 8 meetings, and we're going to have them around the state and try to have them strategically placed so that we're within 2 hours of anybody that wants to attend a meeting. So with that being said, Chairman Gooch.
Turn me on. Good morning. Almost feels like we're back in session, doesn't it? Good to see the Lieutenant Governor's staff back there in the back of the room, Ben and Coburn. Good to have you guys here. It's my pleasure to be a part of this important meeting. This is probably one of the most important issues that this next session of General Assembly will face, and that is the funding of our infrastructure and transportation. And so it's good to have all the board members from the DOT here on the front row. It's good to have your input, and thank you for being here this morning. I have the pleasure of having some good senators on this committee. I'd like to introduce them. To my right, just because they're sitting to my right, not necessarily philosophically to my right, is Senator Brendan Beach, Senator Tyler Harper, and Senator Jack Hill. And I asked Jack if he would bring the checkbook with him this morning, and we'll be able to get this meeting over with quickly, and we can go on to home. And I think Representative England may have a checkbook as well. But I'm also happy to have my assistant, Sidney Rubin, here as well, over to the right. And we look forward to working with all of you. We look forward to having former Secretary LaHood come forward in a few minutes and offer his comments. And I know you're going to be excited to hear his speech, as I heard part of it this morning. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to get to work.
Yeah. All right. Really what we're tasked with in here is trying to come up with a way to fund transportation as we move forward. We all understand and realize that transportation is important to this state from an economic development standpoint and creating jobs and recruiting business and industries in, as well as some congestion relief, especially here in the metropolitan area. And so we're willing to listen, and that's what we're here for. We want to hear ideas, and I think if you will look at the agenda, you'll see, especially this afternoon, we have an open mic, and we want to hear from people. We want to hear from citizens around the state, as well as leaders from around the state. And we're, as I like to say, nothing's off the table, because literally we do want to hear every single idea that you have out there as far as helping us to be able to move this state forward, especially when it comes to transportation. So with that being said, I think we'll start off, as most of you probably already know. We have the Commissioner of the Department of Transportation, Keith Golden, here with us today, and he's going to present to us Keith's done an outstanding job for us over at GDOT, and I also want to applaud our board. They've done an outstanding job there as well, not only in helping him, but y'all have done a great job of working together and working with us, and we really do appreciate that, and thank you for what you've done. So with that being said, Commissioner Gold. Let me turn you on. Does everybody have, you should have one of his, does everybody have his? Yes, everybody's got it. Okay. You should be on now.
Okay, thank you, sir. We really do appreciate the opportunity today to come and present. Hopefully today, when we walk away today, we'll kind of give you an overview of the department, what we're accomplishing, some comparisons to other states in terms of how we perform, some of the strategies that we're using at the Department of Transportation, and some of the challenges. Again, I echo what the chairman said again, which is, our main focus is to try to tie that transportation is the driving force behind a strong economy. And at the Department of Transportation, our Transportation Board is certainly behind that. We work closely with economic development in this state. We continue to look for challenges and ways that we can meet those challenges. And so today we're just going to kind of give you a quick overview, and hopefully you'll ask questions. And Chairman, we'll take questions as we go, however you'd like to do it. Which one of these is going to advance this? The right. I think it's important to start with that the state of Georgia is the 10th largest transportation system in the country. Oftentimes I think we forget how big Georgia really is. We have 17,967 centerline miles of state routes. That's just the center line of the roadway. We have about 85,000 centerline miles of county roads. We have about 17,000 centerline miles of city streets in our state. Very, very big network. Well over 120,000 miles make up the transportation system. I'll also come back on the state route system. We have about 48,000 lane miles that make up the state highway system, and we'll be getting back to that in a few minutes. We also have 14,666 bridges, 4,500 miles of short line and mainline railroads. Of course, the busiest airport in the world, as you already know. The fourth busiest container port in the country. 128 rural transit systems, 14 urban transit systems, and 103 general aviation airports that we work with. We have a large transportation network that needs funding. The other thing I think is very important for this panel to understand is really how big DOT is. And I talk to people many times and they think we're just plan and build roads. We're a much larger organization than that. And I think that gets overviewed sometimes, or maybe not the full extent of what our agency looks like. And we do, as our core function, plan roads, design roads, construct roads, we maintain roads, and we operate roads. Those are our core functions. But the maintenance of those roads is really a huge responsibility, very evident in the snowstorm this past year, very evident to our tourism industry as you drive around the state, how important it is to keep the grass mowed, to keep the welcome centers and rest areas clean and operating in a very good fashion. And all of that costs money. It costs a lot of money. We also do things like oversized, overweight permitting. We oversee outdoor advertising. We maintain over 4,000 traffic signals in the state. There's about roughly 8,000 traffic signals in the state. Just many, many functions. I don't think the average person understands the vast responsibilities of the Department of Transportation. And kind of give you an overview of our staffing levels. We're doing it at times very, very responsible. And I think this slide really tries to present that. If you look at the numbers in 1972, we had over 9,000 employees in a system size that was probably in the neighborhood of about 35,000 lane miles at the time. So you'll see that our head count continues to go down. As of the other day, we have 4,110 employees at our department. At the same time, you'll see that our system size is going up. I mentioned that earlier. We're about 48,000 lane miles that we're maintaining. So we're doing that, a larger system with less people. And so we have to deliver things in a much different fashion. One of the ways that we've been doing our core functions is reaching out to the private sector to help partner with us to do routine maintenance activities. But again, that costs money. It's not necessarily cheaper than doing it with your own folks. It's just a different way of delivering that core function. And again, it's a challenge that you're going to see in our budget that continues to be an area that we need to help focus on. Sure.
1972. What percent of your budget was for personnel costs compared to today?
I could get you that number. I certainly don't know it off the top of my head.
Today, is it 35% or so?
No, our budget for admin costs is not
We pay roughly
$250 million a year.
we pay $270 million a year in personal services.
270 out of 2.2 billion.
So it's less than 25%.
Yes, sir.
Can
Yes,
you
sir.
find out what it was in
Yes, sure.
1972,
We can try to.
percentage-wise?
We could certainly
Thank
try to do that. But again, I think you, as I mentioned earlier, our citizens are really expect a different type of transportation system than 1972. They want real-time traffic information. They want intelligent transportation. They want to know if they're sitting in Ocilla, Georgia, what's going on in those roads. They want to know everything that we know about them. If there's construction, they want to know it in their vehicle, on their phone. They want to know what's going on in terms of litter pickup, trash pickup. The expectations are probably higher than ever on what the system will look like and how it operates. And so we have to meet that challenge. Here's sort of a quick look at FY15. We just started July 1st, our FY15 program, and you see the makeup of our funding source. You see right now we're about 55% federal funds and about 45% state funds when you look at the state motor fuel, and a little under 15 million of state general funds in our program. We continue to be one of the states with the highest dependency on the federal program. Though, if you look at any number, any metric, you'll see that we continue to be one of the highest states in terms of dependency on the federal program. And you're going to hear us continue to drive that point home, that we've got to break away from that. You'll see that if you look at our capital construction and capital maintenance activities, which is roughly $1 billion that the legislature sets aside each year, including the federal piece, we're probably closer to 80% federal, 20% state in terms of what we deliver. And then moving forward with that, some of the things that skew these numbers that make it look a little less is our LMIG program. About $122 million goes out to local governments of state motor fuel straight out is not used for construction.
Commissioner, hold on. We have a question. Chairman Hamilton.
Thank you. Commissioner, of the $1.2 billion, what percentage of our dollars are we getting back on that particular number?
Well, the 1.2 is actually what we get back in formula. Today, if you were to ask me the question, what we're sending to Washington, we send about 18.4 cents per gallon of gas. But right now, I think on average, most states are receiving more than that back. And we'll hit on the federal program a little bit, but definitely the way at the federal level, they're propping up the trust fund and sending back more money. Ours is somewhere around $1.14 for every dollar we're sending to Washington. But we'll touch on that in a minute. It's not a sustainable model either in terms of how you look forward in transportation. In fact, the next slide really hits on that. Most of you probably, if you follow transportation at all, know that last week Congress passed a transportation patch, I'll call it. It's not a bill, it's a patch. Continues to be a major challenge for our agency in terms of how to plan and deliver a program for the Department of Transportation and for the state of Georgia. It's kind of a piecemeal approach that Washington continues to use. It's not something that really sets us up very well for delivering the program. Today, if you were to look at what they set aside for us, they've now funded a transportation bill at the federal level through May 31st, and that will probably be about 70% of what we would be expecting in fiscal year 2015. So we have to start planning today on how to utilize that reduced amount of funds and get us through the state fiscal year and through the federal fiscal year. You can see in the models that continue to be produced is that the Transportation Trust Fund as it is today is just not a sustainable model. And in no way can they continue to find funds to prop up the Highway Trust Fund. So again, it makes a very good, strong case of why we have to get away from the dependency on the federal program. We'll come back to that later also. This is our FY14 budget. We could have presented the 15, but we'll present the 14 because it's a good full year with all the amended dollars in. It was a little over $1 billion, just slightly over $1 billion of state motor fuel. And this is how the money really breaks up. I'm going to start in that green column in the right side of the slide, which is the local maintenance improvement grant formula. As you know, the legislature sets that number up, and we send it out by formula. And the program has been very successful. We've divested ourselves from that, put it back on the local governments, and the program's really going very well. But again, it's $122 million that goes out the door. It's not used for any state transportation priorities. The thing that continues to really struggle or chain the Department of Transportation is the GO bond debt service and the SRTA debt service. Bond indebtedness for us continues to be a big challenge. We're a little over $400 million a year right now in debt service total. A little over $220 million comes from state motor fuel. It's probably a little higher than that. And then the federal program also takes a hit to make up that $400 million in debt. And we'll come back to that also in a few minutes. I keep harping on the orange slide, the maintenance slide. That's our routine maintenance activities. And that's not eligible for federal dollars. We're talking about routine maintenance type activities, mowing grass, picking up litter, cleaning ditches. All of those activities are not eligible for federal dollars. And this is an area we continue to get squeezed in. And as our head count has gone down, we've also had to reach out and do more with the private sector, which, again, is a very sound way to do it. It's just not necessarily always cheaper. And once you start down that path, you really can't back up. There's no way once you get out of certain activities to get back into that business. And so it's a challenge all the time. Right now we do all interstate mowing is done by contractors. We're doing even more of that. We're looking at trying to outsource all of our mowing activities around the state for all of our routes. Again, but it comes at a cost. And once you get out of the mowing business, you're out of the mowing business, and you don't have people that won't have that skill set anymore or have that equipment. Coming on around, you'll see general operations, which is really traffic operations, ITS, other functions, a little over $164 million. And then that big purple slice at the bottom, that's the piece that goes to match the federal program. When we talk about that $1.2 billion, this is the match component of that delivers our capital construction and capital maintenance programs. Sure.
If that number were to increase to, let's say, $1 billion arbitrarily, could you leverage more federal monies with that, or are we maxing out our leverage?
We are definitely, we struggle to match the federal program today.
Okay.
And that's why that piece of the pie at the top, the maintenance piece gets squeezed, because we make sure that we can match every federal dollar.
Okay.
And that formula is not going to change. In fact, it's more likely to go down than it is to go up.
So it's safe to say we're not going to necessarily get more federal funds unless Washington increases their payments to us.
Yeah, and right now they're just looking at trying to figure out ways to keep it at the current levels.
Correct.
They're not looking. I mean, some of the things that they need to do that might involve raising taxes or other things would just keep us at the current funding levels. It would not be an increased funding level.
Right. Thank you.
Is that you, Ed? Go ahead, Ed.
Thank you. Commissioner, I hate to ask you to
No,
go back,
please
but
do.
we got a question
Sure.
on this end. You mentioned that Georgia gets back $1.14 for every dollar that we send to the Fed.
That's correct.
And we've heard a lot of different numbers
Sure.
about that. And
Sure.
I'm sure you have too,
Uh-huh.
about something like 80 cents for every dollar we send.
Yeah, no.
Could you just explain to us the
Be glad
discrepancy?
to, and it's worth elaborating on. Traditionally, in the years gone by, we were a donor state. We were considered a donor state, and that was we were sending up money and getting less back.
Yeah.
And that was the norm for Georgia. Then they came along and they did some things about minimum guarantee and some other things to try to make that a little bit more of an equal playing field, but we were still a donor state. But today, remember, the trust fund, let's just take 1 year, they're taking in roughly $34 billion a year, but the program is set to spend $50 billion a year.
Mm-hmm.
So they're having to make up that delta with general funds.
Okay.
That's where that over and above what we're sending them comes into play. Now, I will tell you that we're getting less than other states still. So there are other states that are getting a better return than $1.14 for every
Okay.
dollar they send up. So in that sense, we probably are still a donor state compared to other states. But that model that Washington is not a way that we can continue to operate. If you heard the other day, the way they solved the deficit for this year to get us through to May is 10 years worth of pension smoothing, and doing some very trick accounting methods and stuff. So
I understand. We're just trying to make sure we got this. Do you know where folks are getting this 80 cents out of every dollar from?
that used to be the number. We
Okay.
back probably not more than 10 to 12 years ago. That was the number you would hear. We were in the low 80s, and then it got up into the mid 90s. What was called minimum guarantee, and now most states are, again, because of that discrepancy,
Okay.
are getting more back than they're actually sending up.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Rhetorical question. Can you tell me where the source of that money's coming from? That
China?
They're sending back. Are they borrowing it?
China, yeah. Yeah. They're also buying up all the commodities. So, yeah. All right, motor fuel tax in Georgia. We definitely have a unique model in Georgia, and I don't need to tell most of you that, but we do think we need to lay the groundwork of how that works and what comes in. And to the left, you'll see the pennies stacked up, the 18.4 cents that every state sends in to the federal government. I think sometimes people also forget in that area, though, that some of that money's taken off to fund FTA and some of the other programs, too. So that all that 18.4 cents does not make its way back to Georgia. The next column, you see the 7.5 cent. That's Georgia's excise tax. We have a flat excise tax. And then the third column you see over there is what's called the 4%, which is the sales tax component of our motor fuel. 3% of that is redirected back to transportation. 1% of that goes to the state general fund. That's roughly $180 million a year, depending on the year. The way that 3% is set for collection purposes, though, is the governor twice a year looks at an average rate and sets a prepaid rate, and that currently is 8.8 cents per gallon. So our current gas tax for Georgia, and we'll get to that again really the next slide, but is 7.5 plus the 8.8 is what makes it its way back to the Department of Transportation directly. And then we have the last column over there, local gas tax on gasoline. We're one of a few states in the country that allow local gas sales tax to be on gasoline. And certainly we have those numbers on what states are currently doing that and what mix. In many of those that even allow it, it's still redirected back to transportation.
You mentioned the 3% sales tax plus the 1% that goes to the state's general fund, but there's also, in most counties, a 7% sales tax.
That's correct.
So that other 3% that stays at the local level, that's being applied to gas as well. Is that correct?
It's being collected on gas. It's being spent either usually eSPLOST, SPLOST,
Okay.
or other programs at that level.
So most typical counties have a eSPLOST for educational purposes, and the counties have a LOST, which they share with the cities, correct, Ross? And then you have another SPLOST for special purpose local option
Correct.
sales
In fact,
tax.
on the next slide, we say the average is around 11.2 cents per gallon on the next slide is what is being collected by the state and local governments. That's not necessarily being redirected back to transportation. In some cases it is.
So is that times 3 then? Or is it
No, that 11.2 would be roughly the average across the state,
Okay.
because not everybody's collecting. And it depends on what day, whether someone's got a SPLOST program or doesn't have a SPLOST program. It ranges from anywhere from 9 to 11 cents a gallon.
Right. Thank you.
Hold on 1 second. Ed?
Yeah, just one, do you have the dollar figures on how much the locals are getting off this?
The last 2 years, we've looked at that number, working with the Department of Revenue. It's been in excess of over 500 million.
Okay.
It's closer to 550 if you look at all taxes.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Last year, I think we had it figured at 512.
Yeah,
That's
right.
the number.
Yeah, you got to look at diesel, and there's several different components, but it's well in excess of 500 million.
Chairman Hamilton.
I just want to clarify, make sure there's no confusion. So that if we use 11.2 cents, that's a sales tax being charged on motor fuel, but ultimately not going to transportation funding.
I can't make a wholesale
Unless the local governing authority decides that they want to put it towards.
Right, eSPLOST certainly is not.
Okay.
SPLOST could be. They could have some of that directed to a transportation program. A lot of states have a mix between courthouses and parks and maybe some recreation. So some piece of that could be going at the local level, but it's not mandated that it go back to transportation. And so this slide actually shows it kind of a little bit better light. 7.5 cent excise, the 8.8 cent prepaid, and then the other funds that make up that. So effectively, 16.3 cents is what we receive right now this year in terms of motor fuel. That makes up the $1 billion in motor fuel collections. And other funds, roughly $700 million is collected that doesn't make its way back.
Just to follow up with Representative Hamilton's comment, to defend our good friends in local governments, they probably spend a lot more than what is collected at the gas pumps at the local level on their local roads. All of their audits would reveal that number, but I know as former SOL commissioner, we spend a lot more than what we would have collected if we dedicated all of that money. Just trying to speak up for my good friend down here on the limb. I understand.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I know Gwinnett County did they not have a dedicated sales tax, a SPLOST just for roads?
Right. They put about 60% of their SPLOST this is going into transportation, this current SPLOST program, and it varies from county to county.
And that number was not based, that 512 is just what comes in, whether they spend it or not.
Sure. Big number.
Sure. And we're one of the few states in the country. We're one of the few states that do allow that, though.
Right.
Commissioner, can you talk to us a little bit about how the gas tax is collected? Is it at the jobber level, the rack, the terminal, if you will? How is that collected, and are we making sure we're getting every collection due to us?
Yeah. We do not collect at the rack per se. I believe the excise tax is collected at the distributor level, and the prepaid comes from the actual sales at the store. If I'm getting that correct. Yes, but you know, there are states that are now taxing at the rack, you know, which is at the beginning, and they say that they get anywhere from 5 to 10% more by collecting at the rack as opposed to.
Well, I believe the state of Alabama started doing that a couple of years ago, and they said they increased 12%.
Right, and it's initial up, and then it kind of levels off. Yes.
Right.
We did start collecting at the rack.
The jobber,
Yeah,
the
jobber level
distributor,
was-
not the.
Yeah,
Yeah,
not at the wholesale.
Right.
Jobber rack.
That's just the excise too, though.
That's correct. Chairman Hamilton.
Sorry, while we're talking about local levels, and you're looking at other states, you're obviously familiar with Forsyth County, the county that I hail in, is looking at a $200 million bond on in November to raise transportation because we simply haven't, and quite honestly, much or some of that money at least is going to be look at going towards state roads because the state has just not been able to fund the roads.
That's correct.
And then we look at the sales tax here. Are you aware of any other states that provide a mechanism for those local communities that help themselves more, that there's some more matching funds? I know that we live in a state that we love partnerships, and I would be interested in knowing if other states have any kind of additional funding or part of their funding is more on a match basis of some type.
And again, there are actually states that allow locals to vote to tax gas for the money to come back to them. And so that's Florida allows that up. They have a range, and we can certainly get you any of that kind of information. I know of I think there's 39 states that allow no sales tax on gas. I think that was our last number. The other 11 have some variation of allowing it to go back to the local government or not. But only about 3 states that actually allow sales tax to be collected on gas that doesn't necessarily get dedicated to transportation.
I have those numbers from last year. I'll get them to you, Chairman Hamilton.
I've got some elaborate spreadsheets if you want to see them. All right, this kind of puts some things in context, though, and I think it's probably one of the things that probably does bear a little bit digging in. You'll see these types of numbers. I know when y'all go to your legislative conferences and when you see around the country, you'll see that Georgia has 46 cents, and we're right up there at the average, and around the country. In fact, the U.S. average today is just north of our current number. But as we've been focusing on, that doesn't make its way back to transportation in Georgia. So you could argue that 46 cents a gallon of sales tax for our gas is enough for gas tax. It's got to make its way back to transportation if you really want it to be very effective. I think that's something everyone needs to really understand. Also, looking at this chart on the right side, if you look at the numbers, the darker columns are the bar charts on the left side make up the excise tax. We have a very low excise tax compared to other states. And then you look at that second gray bar, the light gray piece, that's the local sales tax component, our state sales tax component. Ours is much larger than most states. And then the gray to the right is the 18.4 cents that everybody puts into the Federal Transportation Trust Fund. So you can see that in a large part, and this is something that we've looked in. One of the reasons we really dove into this a couple of years ago, in fact, Mr. Bowen was the one that brought it to our attention quite often, is we believe we have people that leave Georgia to go to our surrounding states to buy gas. In fact, I know they do. Anderson, South Carolina, Alabama, because gas tax is cheaper there. And this really shows what the effective rates of some of our surrounding states around us really are. We showed that the 16.3 plus the 18.4 comes up to 34.7 is our effective rate. And you see some of the rates in the other states. And don't forget that many of these other states, including Florida and South Carolina, have other sources of revenue outside of just gas tax. They get money from ad valorem, from car tags, and from other sources that generate additional revenue. So one of the things that really concerns us about motor fuel tax, though, and this is not something I really need to tell this group, but it's my opportunity to make sure everyone's aware, is that one thing we do know is that gas tax is not necessarily predictable. What those dollars are going to be, they're fairly consistent, but you can see the red line below is the is the excise tax, I believe, and the blue is the what we would call the prepaid number, but it's moving around quite often. But gas tax in general is still hovering around $1 billion, even though we've got people moving to our state every year. Vehicle miles of travel is about the same. We're not really seeing any increase in revenue. And when you look nationally at the motor fuel outlook, again, I don't have to tell you that driving is down. That's nationally. Everyone seems to be kind of flattening off. It's some sort of steady. Those numbers tend to be kind of flatlined. And then you have the new CAFE standards, which is going to make vehicles even more fuel efficient. So if your revenue is based on gas, and gas is being used less and being used more efficiently, all good things, but it's not a good way to sustain revenue for a long period of time. So the outlook is very bleak.
You're talking about driving is down. You're talking about vehicle miles traveled in total.
Yeah, it's in average, it's down a little bit.
Have you looked at demographics and the aging population and the baby boomers as they begin to reach retirement? Is that a factor also in this?
I think if you study what's going on nationally, I think younger people are moving back into the inner city environments, whether it's Columbus or Augusta or Atlanta. They feel very comfortable in that environment. They want to live and work close to where they're the same place where they like their activities.
And that's indicative of the housing trends we're seeing as well.
Correct.
Thank you.
Chairman Hamilton.
Based on what you told me the other day, I just want to clarify again. You said that in the state of Georgia, if you drive 12,000 miles a year and your vehicle gets 23 miles to the gallon, that your net effective tax to the Georgia transportation infrastructure, the whole process, is about $85 per year.
24
It's
miles.
roughly, if you drive, 12,000 miles. And in fact, we've got some of those numbers we're going to hit on.
So this idea, yet we've got people that think that they pay thousands of dollars in tax.
We've been doing our own little man on the street interviews, and it's amazing what people think they pay. They think it equates with how much they pay for a gallon of gasoline. And in fact, it does, because we do have a 4% sales tax that does get adjusted, but rarely does it get adjusted up. Even when the market goes up, we tend to keep it pretty flat.
But I know I've heard that from many people about how much money y'all get, and the reality is the average person at those.
And as I showed you the numbers, it really hasn't changed. Whether gas is $2.50 a gallon or $4 a gallon, our revenue is pretty much the same. How do we compare to other states?
Hold on 1 second. Mr. Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sort of, if you could build on that equation, 12,000 miles equals 85 at 23 miles per gallon. Have y'all done the calculations as to what it's going to be when folks are driving at 61?
It's going to be
a lot less.
20% less.
I know that.
That's my Georgia Tech math. I'm not.
Even a history major, even a history major knew that. I'm just trying to figure, because a lot of the concern is the diminishing return from the motor fuel tax. I wondered if y'all have just done the calculations when you expect when we get to 2025. I guess that's my question.
Certainly. Yeah, I think a lot of people have looked at that model, both at the AASHTO level with the American Association of State Highway Transportation. Everybody's just leery of that and kind of targeting what they think fuel will be. And again, I mean, until you know what your tax is, though, it's hard to predict what your revenue would be. But based on our current trends, it will be very underwhelming.
Well, I understand that. I'm just sort of, if you could at some point,
Sure.
flatline where we are now,
Sure.
in terms of both taxes and gas prices. I know that's volatile, but if you could somewhere down the road, so we can go back and tell people exactly how much we should be expecting to lose in terms of motor fuel tax in the future. That would be a helpful statistic for those of us going back.
And I certainly glossed over, one of the facts that our group really wanted to drive home, which is the buying power of that has diminished so much of our tax, and it would play into that also as commodities go up and stuff. But even over time, our buying power is down. The $1 billion probably equates to about $700 million if you look at how the buying power and how the inflation is impacted.
Thank you. Thank you.
Follow up on what Representative Lindsay was saying. So you're saying $85 per year is the number I heard is what an average person would pay.
I got a good slide.
What would the average person pay that's using the hot lanes every day, coming in from Gwinnett County into Atlanta back and forth? What would that be on a yearly basis on an average rush hour?
My state road toll authority guy's going to say the average toll is $1.50, isn't it? $1.86 on it.
So you'll hit $85 pretty quick if you do that 5 days a week.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard rumor of people paying more, but yeah.
I've seen it up to $6, I think, last week. But
that just shows you, we'll get to that slide too, about the future.
The senator from Gwinnett speaks highly of that program, but $8, okay, thank you.
All right, how do we compare to other states in terms of our capital program and our total budget? South Carolina, a little over $1.3 billion. Notice the red piece of the slide there, which is their debt service numbers. And you'll see that it's a very small part of their program. Georgia, we're at $2.2 billion. North Carolina spends about $4.3 billion on infrastructure. Virginia, about $4.3 billion. And Florida, a little over $5.1 billion on capital improvements each year. And again, Florida's probably the closest to us at 11% in debt. We have over 18% debt of our total program. Very hard to continue to operate at that level. Some other areas that are good for comparison purposes when we're trying to show that we're a very transparent state. Yeah, you can see spending per capita. I think this is well documented. We remain near the lowest in the country, around 49th in the country. At around $159 per person annually. In terms of employees per capita, so for our population, we're 45th in the country as an agency. We're going to highlight a few other agencies that are similar to us. And then system size per employee, we're about 37th in the country, that being the size of our network that we maintain versus the number of employees we have. This slide probably is a better comparison. We picked some states that are similar to us in population, similar to us in road size, both center line and lane miles, to show you kind of what they're expending on capital and what they're expending on routine maintenance. Now, routine maintenance is those things that are mowing grass, the things that are just not federally eligible. But as you see, we picked, we always use Ohio as a good example to us. These are states that we feel like we compete against. Roughly 49,000 lane miles that they have, 19,000 centerline miles. Their 2012 population was a little over 11 million people. They had about 5,536 employees in 2012. Spent $2.4 billion on capital, which is double our budget, and spent twice as much on routine maintenance activities. So I think you'll see a trend there that we're just not really where we need to be as an agency and as a department and as a state if we want to continue to be competitive with many of these states. Again, you can throw in some of these states have snow and ice that's part of their routine maintenance activities. California is a great example. California's centerline miles is less than ours, but they have 18,000 employees. Also union. As the chief engineer tells me. So, Florida is another good example we like to compare to. We see them quite often, and obviously they're a warm weather state like us, don't have to deal with snow and ice. 7,443 employees for less centerline miles than we have. And their capital budget is 3 times what our capital budget is. And their maintenance budget is 4 times what our budget is. This was the question Representative Hamlin we went ahead at. This is really interesting to us as we go out and talk to people and what they think they pay for transportation and purposes of transportation. And this is a good table that really breaks it down. The number of miles you drive and what comes back in state motor fuel taxes, and then breaking it down to a cost per month. Very good example of that. And again, it's around $85 if you use the 16.3 cents. Now, to be honest, you also have the federal portion too. So you could double that and say you're paying $170 if you drove 12,000 miles between your federal and your state motor fuel. But what comes back under state motor fuel is around $85 a month. For that $85, people expect the roads to be perfect, no congestion, all the traffic signals to be synchronized. And my joke is it's only synchronized if it's green when you get there. If it's another color, it's not synchronized. But that's everybody screams it's not synchronized. They want us to have intelligent transportation. They want real-time information. They want the grass mowed. They want the welcome centers and restroom areas spotless. They want everything, and it's hard to do on $85. Putting that into some other perspectives, what does a person pay? So $9 a month for gas. This is the average cell phone bill, $71 per person in a household, and $122 a month for electricity. So I would argue that transportation is a pretty good value. To give you some other numbers to talk about what transportation really does cost, though. $1 million a mile for resurfacing interstate, $278,000 to resurface a state route, and $30.9 million just for mowing the grass. That's twice on interstates and three times on interstates and twice a year on our state routes. $14 million to pick up litter, of which we better not have thrown any of that down. We're picking up litter. $5.2 million for rest areas and welcome centers to maintain them. $5.3 million to construct 1 U lane of urban roadway. 5.6 miles a year to maintain our ITS infrastructure. And $8.4 million a year just on maintaining and operating traffic signals. So when we talk about what our needs are, we really focus on 3 areas. We talk about mobility, we talk about freight and the importance of freight in our state, and we talk about safety. And so, just on the Georgia strategic plan, looking at mobility and what we're going to do as we move forward in the state of Georgia, we're very focused on this. Some numbers will tell you that just in 1 year, and I think this is a TTI number that's quoted quite often, the cost of congestion in Georgia, really in metro Atlanta, predominantly is about $3.1 billion a year just for the cost of congestion. My capital maintenance, our capital construction program is $800 million, including my federal dollars, if the federal dollars are there. It dwarfs that. So the need to invest in congestion is certainly there, and it's clear. We really want to be innovative. I think you're seeing some innovative things as you drive around the state. We're doing things, trying to do less, getting more capacity out of what we already have, putting more money into technology, putting more money into divergent diamond interchange, innovative intersection designs, anything like flex shoulders that we can squeeze a little bit more capacity during peak times. But those tricks only go so far. The other area for our state, as all of you know, is freight and freight logistics, and we've done a recent freight logistics plan. And again, I don't need to tell you that we're a hub for the South for logistics, and it continues to grow. And we have a very good detailed logistics freight plan. On the safety side, this is something I don't think we get enough credit for in the Department of Transportation.
Hold on, Mr. Commissioner.
Sure.
17. Hold on one second before I turn you on. Why don't our legislators that are here, if y'all want to, come up and fill in these seats here and allow others to be able to sit down if they want to, out in the hall and all, to kind of give some room. But if you're a legislator, why don't you come on up here and sit down next to Pro Tem, and that will allow some seats to open up. You sure can. They're also working on an overflow room in 605 where they'll start streaming it, but they don't have it ready just yet. But maybe this will help some.
I was just going to ask, have you done the modeling of the congestion from freight with the deepening of the Savannah port?
The freight logistics plan that Toby Carr, the planning director, and the team put together certainly looked at that and what the new needs are going to be. And that certainly has an impact in many of our corridors, particularly the I-75 corridor, coming from Macon up to Atlanta, and several other corridors where we have really big needs for interstate improvements. So yeah, those have all been in consideration. And the freight logistics plan is relatively new, and it does a really good job laying out the priorities.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Representative Smyrie.
Commissioner, as a follow-up, the congestion number, did you say $3 billion?
$3.1 billion annually is what it's predicted at, yes.
How do you, what's your process of calculation?
That's actually done by the Texas Transportation Institute, and it looks at, just delay, what it means to freight people. They use standard numbers for the call, and obviously you look at all the things with the non-reoccurring congestion, all those things like wrecks that happen, the cost of wrecks and secondary crashes. They put all of that into some numbers, and it comes from a national group, not the Department of Transportation.
I say that because that's one of our takeaways on the reason why we're here is to deal with those numbers as it relates to economic benefits to the state.
It certainly is, and to continue to be competitive, those are things we have to look at and address.
Thank you.
I mentioned fatalities.
Hold on, Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was hoping that you could perhaps authenticate one figure I was given. I had one group send to me a figure saying that that the average driver wastes in Metro Atlanta $900 per year in fuel stuck in congestion.
Those numbers, yeah, we can pull a lot of those numbers from Texas Transportation Institute and some of the other groups that do the national studies. They use the same variables and make sure that that they're very consistent in predicting those numbers. They pull a lot of our information from our content servers on our ITS system to validate those numbers.
Yeah. So is that $900 figure accurate?
Our planning guru here says about $1,100 annually right now.
And that's folks. That's how much people are wasting in
Delay.
gasoline sitting in traffic in Metro Atlanta. Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right. Fatalities. Again, an area I don't think we get enough credit for in the Department of Transportation. In 2005, we had over 1,752 fatalities a year on our roadways. And we made it a mission to really go after fatalities, teaming with our districts and our cities and county governments to do all system safety projects, to do things with our local governments, to focus on those roads that we saw the highest number, working with the Department of Public Safety and the Governor's Office of Highway Safety, and even the State Road Toll Authority. And we've gone down 8 years in a row in fatalities, and we're one of the few states that has continued that trend down. We're very proud of that. We're under 1,200 fatalities, but again, 1,200 fatalities is still too many. And that's got to be an area, I mean, you cannot be a Department of Transportation and say safety is not your number one thing. And so we're going to continue to be an agency that's focused on that. And again, reducing crashes, serious injuries, and fatalities has got to be on the top of our list. I think Dr. Mike Meyer a couple of years ago did a study on safety and crashes in just Georgia too, and I think that number shows about $2.1 billion, and we need to verify that number with him, but the cost of crashes and fatalities in our state dwarfs what we spend on safety. So what are we doing right now? And these are some interesting projects because, it gets back to kind of the unique relationship that we have in Georgia. We can't do multi-year contracting, so we're having to be very innovative in how we deliver some of our largest projects. And the legislature has worked very closely with us on how to do that using some innovative financing techniques. But we've got the Northwest Corridor project underway, $598 million. We should be breaking ground on that managed lane project later this fall. We have that on the I-75 on the south side, again, another managed lane project. We're starting work. We've got environmental underway on roughly somewhere between $900 million project on the 400-285 interchange, so it's desperately needed. We have the last mile project down at Jimmy DeLoche Parkway coming out of the ports. It's a $73 million construction project that the legislature bonded. But these are not things that you can continuously do either, though, just propping up things and kind of putting the debt out further, managing that debt. It's a good strategy on certain projects, on large projects, but you can't use it on every single infrastructure investment that you're going to make. You've got to have some capital on hand. These are some projects that we need to do desperately that we don't have funding for. I-285, I-20 interchange, $450 million. I-285, I-20 East interchange, another $250 million project. The Revive 285 project that's gridlocked every afternoon is in excess of $3 billion. I-85 widening to South Carolina to go from Gwinnett County up to the state line. If you've ever driven that on a weekend, it's unbelievable. Again, another $800 million, and that's probably a conservative number. I-85 widening to Alabama, which gets back to the freight, some of the freight studies that have shown $450 million. The 1675 interchange, which is needed down in the Macon area, the middle part of the state, again for freight logistics and infrastructure and safety of our public down there, over $300 million. The cost to complete the GRIP corridor is in excess of $6.8 billion, what we have remaining left. And just looking at some of the first tier of managed lanes in Metro Atlanta, you're over $2 billion. Again, I told you my capital budget is about $800 million, including the federal portion in an annual year. So we're not getting there very fast.
Commissioner, as we look at these numbers, though, currently just roughly it's about 12 billion.
And that's just a short list, yeah.
And that's the short list. But as we put them off, that price is going to grow.
Exactly. Again, the 400-285 interchange would be a great example. Just 2 years ago when we did our rough cost estimates, it was one number. But you go back out, property in the corridor's taken off, right away, construction materials. As construction industry comes back, your bids are going up. So yeah, the long-term cost of putting these off is significant.
Thank you.
So just in some closing thoughts, I guess that the importance of transportation to Georgia, and again, I keep talking about transportation is the driving force behind a strong economy. The last major statewide plan that was updated, there's actually being updated currently again. Toby Carr's leading that effort and doing a great job. The transportation plan identified roughly revenues to be about $86 billion for that roughly, 30-year period is what the anticipated revenues would be. The actual unconstrained scenario of needs in that plan came out at a little over $160 billion, leaving a gap of over $74 billion that didn't make it into that plan. And I'm going to continue to drive home the fact that we need to get away from the federal dependency. We cannot and really should not depend on the federal government to deliver our needs. They're not going to do that. Every U.S. congressman we meet with says the state needs to look and address their own problems. So they're looking at the national level. The state needs to find their funding for their statewide effort. And again, I think that's something we've been trying to demonstrate to you through some of our quick response projects and things that if you unchain us from federal dollars, we can do things very quickly. We're not going to hurt the environment. We're going to follow all the environmental processes, but you get things at a cheaper cost and in a quicker time. And with that,
let me address that one. Basically, and we've had this conversation before, and when you figure Davis-Bacon, when you figure NEPA, environmental and all, and time frame in there, we're looking at, when a federal dollar is tied to it, is it safe to say roughly close to 40% more on the cost of a project?
It could. Time is the enemy, again, as you mentioned, the cost of construction and the delays that it takes, lots of mitigation costs that you have to do and undertake. So those are things that, again, we're not going to hurt the environment or those things, but some of the federal dollars have a lot of strings attached.
Thank you. Any questions? Senator Lucas.
Commissioner, are you saying we don't need to get any money to match federal highway monies when they put the money back in the trust fund? Is that what you're trying to say?
I'm saying we need that money plus some.
Well, I thought that would be the normal thing, but we understand that they won't pass a budget probably in November, but they are looking at putting monies in the highway trust fund up to January.
They did pass the bill last week, got it to May 31st.
All right, but the other thing is that we got to be ready to draw down those funds whenever. So that means you got to have the match money.
That's correct.
I hope we're not saying we don't want the federal money. Cause
no, sir.
That's Georgia taxpayers' money up there too. They got it up in the Northeast corridor. They got Amtrak and all that, and they got all that stuff through the Highway Trust Fund while we sitting down here arguing and talking about what we don't need.
Well, no, I think we're being very clear that we want our federal dollars back. And again, you look at states like Florida and California where it makes up less than 30% of their program, the federal dollars. And they use those federal dollars wisely, though. They put them on resurfacing projects, rehabilitation of bridges, and things that don't really mire you down in some of the other processes. And so they use them very wisely. But no state would want to not get their federal dollars. In Georgia, we have our match for our Georgia portion. As a legislature, y'all do a great job making sure we have enough for the match.
Another question, Mr. Chairman. The 7516.
Yes, sir.
With the widening of the port, it turns into one lane either way, which means that you got to yield to that tractor trailer running. Either run off the side of the road or stop. It's $300 million now. When we first started talking about it 15, 20 years ago, it was a lot less than that.
Sure.
What are we going to do about it? The port is getting wide, and the trucks are running. So are we going to wake up one morning with a fog and have a 50-car pileup in one lane at an intersection?
Well, again, I said very clearly that safety is our #1 priority, and I certainly hope that never happens, and we'll do our part to do that. But we need the funding to build that interchange, and I think it continues to rise to the top as one of the priorities in the state. We're just short the funding to do it.
I just wanted to follow up with the earlier question. We get about $273 million in your budget a year for capital projects, and you leverage every dollar of that to federal money. And you told me earlier you did not leave any money on the table up there. Is that correct?
We in fact use every bit of our federal obligation every year. We're one of the states that actually competes for what's called redistribution. We use all of our federal, and we get a little redistribution back from states that didn't utilize theirs.
Thank you.
We got about time for one more question. Anybody got one more question? If not, thank you, Mr. Commissioner. We appreciate you today. Did a great job. You want to recognize?
Yeah. Before we introduce Secretary LaHood, I'd like to step back and recognize one of our other members on the committee that we neglected to recognize earlier, and that's Steve Green, who everybody in the room probably knows. He's former chairman of the Georgia Chamber, is that correct? And also on the Ports Authority. Mr. Green, we're proud to have you here with us and look forward to your leadership on this committee. This morning we had a special speaker over at the Georgia Transportation Alliance breakfast. Secretary Ray LaHood was there, and he gave a very honest and truthful speech, and I think he's going to probably repeat some of the same things here that I heard this morning. I think everyone needs to really listen to what he's got to say. He comes from the state of Illinois. He was the Secretary of Transportation for, I think, 4.5 years. And he was also a U.S. Congressman, 7 terms, correct, Secretary? Undefeated, never defeated in an election. So we should all probably learn something from him today. But Secretary LaHood, please come forward and take the podium, and we give you a Georgia welcome. Thank you.
Either place.
That'd be good.
Wherever you want to sit. If you want to sit, you're welcome to sit right there. We'll turn you on, Secretary.
Perhaps Channel 2 would appreciate me sitting here. Maybe the rest of you wouldn't. I don't know.
They're going to adjust.
Let me. Oh, I screwed it up for 5 other channels, though, I guess, huh? Yeah, thank you for moving all this over here. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this very important hearing. And I know it's important because this room is full, and there are many people standing outside. And let me begin by something I said to the group earlier. I came to the state right after I was sworn in as Secretary of Transportation to a meeting of one of your alliances, and someone stood up after I had finished my presentation and said, "How can Georgia get more money?" And I said, "Georgia needs to get its act together." And I think during the last 4.5 years, you've come a long way in getting your act together. And what I mean by that is, there are a lot of, I've visited every state in the country in the last 4.5 years during my time, and probably 225 cities. I've been here plenty, and I've enjoyed watching your Republican governor, who I served with in the U.S. House of Representatives, and I respect him a great deal, and your mayor work together. I think the reason that your Savannah port is in the position that it's in is because your Republican governor and Democratic mayor work together. I visited with them at the port, and I know that the vice president came to the port, and I know that the reason the port is on its way to being one of the most significant ports in the country when the Panama Canal opens is because Georgia has gotten its act together and people are working together. Now, we've had a long tradition, 236 years of bipartisanship in transportation, and that's the way things get done. But unfortunately, there's a small crowd in Washington that is there not to get things done and not to work in a bipartisan way, but to stop things and to say no to making progress. And we're in a mess in America when it comes to transportation. I come from Illinois, and we had a brutal winter in Illinois. And Illinois and many of the northern states are one big pothole. We need to fix up our infrastructure in America, and we need leadership in Washington to do it. The reason we have an interstate system, the reason you have all these interstates running through your state, is because of the Highway Trust Fund and because of Congresses who had a vision and a plan to connect America based on President Eisenhower's vision. The reason that we have transit systems all over America is because people in Washington allowed for some of the money to be used to build transit systems and bus systems all over America. Every transit system is 50 years old and crumbling. The interstates are crumbling. Bridges are falling down. And the solution that I've been recommending since I left the department, and it's much easier from the seat that I'm in than the seat that you're in to say what I'm going to say. We need to raise the gas tax. It has not been raised since 1993. Now that's 2 decades. When's the last time any of you went without an increase in something in 2 decades? We don't do it in anything else. But we're doing it in infrastructure. We raised the gas tax, and there was a big debate during that time, President Clinton was president, about indexing. Our proposal is that if we want to get back to being number one in infrastructure in America, which means fixing up our interstates, fixing our bridges that are falling down, fixing up 50-year-old transit systems, and encouraging the kind of development that you want in your state, we need to raise the gas tax at least 10 cents a gallon and index it. Now, I know that's a hard vote. I've sat in your chairs. I was in the assembly in Illinois. My son is a state senator in Illinois. I'm proud of him. You have hard jobs. And people in Washington have hard jobs. So, in order to get back to where we can compete with China, which are starting to build 85 new airports in China. And you go to Beijing or Shanghai, and what do you see? You see new roadways every time you go there. You see new bridges, new airports. And what are they doing? They're out-competing us, and they're attracting American companies because they have the infrastructure. There's no secret why Caterpillar, which their corporate headquarters is my hometown of Peoria, Illinois. I know Caterpillar very well. It's a great company. Now, why did they come to Georgia? Because you offered them a good tax structure, but you offered them good workers, but you also offered infrastructure, a place to land where people could get to their facility. Why is State Farm locating a regional office in Georgia? Because you offered them good workers, a good tax structure, but also good infrastructure. If you're going to continue to attract business, attract economic development, provide jobs for the people you represent, we have to deal with this infrastructure program. We have to have the resources. If America is going to be number one, we need an increase in the gas tax, which hasn't been raised in 2 decades. That's how we build America. Now, you have to ignore the naysayers. There'll always be naysayers. And the truth is that Georgia is going to be outcompeted by other states if you don't get somebody from your delegation to serve on the Transportation Committee. I got elected in 1994 as a Republican. Newt became Speaker. The first committee I wanted on was the Transportation Committee because I knew I could take care of my district and my home state of Illinois. Georgia has nobody on the Transportation Committee. Now, you got a Senate race coming up here. I'm not going to be political. You'll all decide who you want for your senator. But in the next 6 years, Congress is going to write a transportation bill. Are you going to have somebody in the room in Washington when that bill is written that'll be a voice for Georgia? Well, you don't have anybody in the House, and you don't have anybody in the Senate, there's going to be a transportation bill. They're not going to keep kicking the can down the road. They can't. We're not going to let them. And where are you all going to be? Where's your influence going to be for all these grand plans that your commissioner has come up with and that your constituents want? So that has to be another part of what you're all thinking about. And let me just finish with this, and I'll be happy to answer questions. As I said, it's easy because I'm a private citizen, and I love it because I can say what I want, and I'm not constrained by people in the White House telling me what to say. So you all have tough decisions to make, and you got a great program here. You got some great projects. They need to be funded. If this state will continue to grow, you can continue to attract the state farms and the Caterpillars and other companies to your state, create jobs, only if you improve your infrastructure. Only if you improve your infrastructure. You got a pretty good tax system here. That's why businesses like to come to Georgia. You got a very good workforce. If you're going to continue to grow, and you're going to be the magnet for this region of the country, obviously State Farm thinks that, then you got to step up here. You got to send people to Washington that are willing to help you provide the resources. You cannot do what you want to do in this state with your own resources. The idea of giving all the money back to the states, well, if that had happened, we wouldn't have an interstate system, because some states wouldn't have had the money to build them, like in North Dakota, South Dakota, states like that. We've had a good system in America. The Highway Trust Fund has been the pot of money. You know, we can talk about vehicle miles traveled, tolling, public-private partnerships, all good ways to fund transportation. But second only to having a big pot of money where you set the priorities, you send your people to Washington, and the money comes back to help you do what you want to do. That's what America was built on. That's what will keep America growing. And so I know that I know that there was a fair amount of disappointment when the referendums went down, but don't give up. The group I met with this morning, they're the leaders. You're all the leaders. You don't get elected to make easy decisions. That's not why you get elected. That's not what the job's about. You get elected to make the hard decisions, to move your state forward, to move this region forward, to continue to compete. I encourage you to do that, and I thank you for your service, and I thank you for letting me sound off here a little bit today on a few things that I think are important, not only for your state, but for the country.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Anybody have any questions? Who's 23? Is that Chairman Hamilton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for those remarks. One of the questions that I would have is that no matter how much you increase the motor fuel tax and index it, we still have more and more vehicles that would pay virtually nothing or a smaller amount as we go to more electric cars and higher miles per gallon and the numbers that we were talking about, Lindsay was talking about a while ago. From your perspective all over the country, we've certainly heard many of them, but unfortunately for some of us, this is our second study committee in 8 years on this topic. But what other ways of innovation and funding? I know you mentioned the P3s and those, but from a motor fuel replacement tax almost, or a user fee of some type, what are some of the other examples that you've been encouraged by or seen that you think that Georgia should look at?
I think that you all, I'm not smart enough to know enough about your tax code. I was watching these charts, obviously, but you all need to continue to, to do your work here. In order to do those big projects, increasing the gas tax will allow states like Georgia to finish those big projects. Look at the CAFE standards, which I worked on when I was at DOT. We developed them with the EPA. The one thing you should know is in 2018, there's a look-back provision in the rule that says, stop where we are. Let's look back and see what impact this is going to have, all these fuel-efficient cars, by 2025. It's going to diminish the Highway Trust Fund. There's no question about that. People are going to be driving more fuel-efficient cars. But my point is this. For big projects, like an interstate, like the projects that were up on the screen, if you increase the gas tax 10 cents a gallon and index it, you're fine. You're fine to do those big projects. And then you'll have the resources to maintain the interstate, even while the gasoline receipts are going down. That's my point. They are going to go down. I agree with you on that. And I take some responsibility for it. But over 50 years, we built the interstate system. And every year, the cost went up and up and up to where, you know what it costs now to build? You had it up here. Millions of dollars to build 1 mile. But if we increase the Highway Trust Fund, the gas receipts at the federal level, every state, including Georgia, will be able to do their big projects. As long as you got somebody in the room when they're writing the bill. That's pretty important. And I'm telling you that from experience. I was on the Transportation Committee in Washington for 6 years. We wrote 2 6-year bills under Speaker Gingrich's leadership and Chairman Schuster's leadership. And being on the committee means that they know what the important projects are in Central Illinois. This is an important thing to remember. You're all politicians. And you all know how decisions are made around here. If you're not in the room, you're not going to be heard. Right? Right.
Any other questions?
So, really, I know your point, but I think you'll have the money if people in Washington get a vision, get a little courage, pass an increase in the gas tax, tick up that Highway Trust Fund, raise it 10 cents a gallon, maybe spread it over 6 years. Maybe do 3, 3, and 4, or something like that to, make people feel better. But index it. Then you're in the catbird seat for the big projects, which is what you really care about in terms of your ability to attract business, attract economic development, and really, keep things moving around here.
Any other questions? Any other legislators that's not on the committee? If you have any questions, we'll be glad to. We got a few minutes if you want to ask a question.
I wondered if the chairman was running for something because he allowed all of you to come up here and you're not even on the committee. I thought that was pretty good.
And most of them are on Transportation Committee.
Oh, they are?
Yeah. But no, I'm not running for anything. I'm probably one of the few in here, Mr. Secretary, that's not. But
well, you give them a comfortable seat, and then they'll start thinking what a good guy you are.
Yeah, Speaker Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question. I heard you describe what you would do at the federal level with the 10 cent, and you heard the different challenges we have with our local portion. What would be, based on what you saw, what would be your suggestion on how to fund these projects, our share, our portion, for Georgia?
Let me tell you what they did in Virginia, and you should look at the Virginia model because it's different. And in Virginia, what they did, they flipped it from the gas tax to a sales tax, and people want to know how it's working. Well, they just started it, and they had a totally Republican-controlled legislature and a Republican governor. They did this about a year ago, and it just clicked in. And now they flipped to a Democratic governor and a Democratic legislature. And I'll tell you why they did it. Because of Northern Virginia. Any of you that have been to Washington know that Northern Virginia is just as crowded as any highway in Georgia. Because that's where many of the people are now living, in those areas. Dulles Airport is out there. When I was at DOT, we funded the Silver Line, which will take the metro system out there. They did it because Northern Virginia people wanted more hot lanes, more roadways, and more transit, the Silver Line. And if your current system is inadequate, then start thinking outside the box. And some states have done hot lanes, and they work, and they pay for them with tolls. Very few experiments on vehicle miles traveled, because people, are all concerned about the privacy. The public-private partnerships have in an era when there have been less money, some states have used that. And I don't know what to tell you about the taxes you collect. In terms of whether to raise those, I don't know enough about the Georgia tax system to really make a recommendation the way I would with the federal system. But I know what other states have done, and in California they have this system where you can put anything on the ballot for a referendum. So what they did, they put on the ballot a 1 penny increase in the sales tax, which raised, like in a couple counties, they did this county by county, $40 billion. And they actually listed on the ballot the projects that are getting funded. So when the voter goes in the booth, or when you're trying to sell this, they actually see what project, they recognize what streets are going to be repaved or what roads are, and 95% of these referendums pass. So the idea that people are against raising taxes, they're not against it if they know the money's going to be spent for what they were told it's going to be spent for. They see their friends and neighbors working, building these roads, and they see a pothole filled or a new roadway in the front of their house. So those are a couple suggestions. Look at Virginia, and I know you've tried the referendum thing, and I know there's a lot of disappointment about that. So that's pretty measly advice, but that's about the best I can do. Measly is a Midwestern colloquial term.
Representative Smyrie.
Mr. Secretary, your statement on the Congress is an eye-opener as it relates to transportation. I mean, here in Georgia, serving on the Transportation Committee and on our DOT is a major position, and to have Congress and have entire delegation absent without any transportation presence is something I think opened all of our eyes as it relates to the future, and what transportation is a key economic component.
It's the biggest economic incentive for any community or any state.
Well, you've given. I think that's something we need to pay attention to and to look at, and because it's a major component, and Georgia ought to be a player in that aspect. Short of that, what other ways do we influence the new transportation bill going forward with our presence there?
Well, I participated in some of the visits that when your folks came up to, the chamber sent some people up to Washington. They invited me to come and speak to them, and you got some good coalitions going on. You really do. I met with one of them this morning, but you got some good groups, business leaders, community leaders that have really taken an interest in. But I think it bears repeating. You got to have a couple people from your delegation in the room, and you don't.
I agree with
I
you
want to tell you this
100%.
story, and I'm sure that Newt wouldn't mind me telling you. When I came to Congress, I came as a former chief of staff. I'd worked for the minority leader, and then he retired, and I ran and won the seat. So in '95, when I came, I knew I wanted to be on the Transportation Committee because I knew I could do a lot of good for my home district and for the state of Illinois, and we did. And but you know what Speaker Gingrich told me when he came up to Washington as a new congressman from his district? You know what committee he got on? Transportation. You know why? Because of Hartsfield Field. Because of the airport. He wanted to look out for the airport. Now you have one of the largest airports in the world, one of the busiest, and you got nobody on the Transportation Committee looking out for it. Think of what an economic engine the airport is. And nobody's looking out for it. Nobody's in the room when they're talking about airports. And that was pretty telling to me. And that made me feel like, I was going on the transportation. He told me that, when he was speaker. He said, get on the transportation committee. You can do a lot of good. And I knew that. And he said, I did that.
Thank you. Point well made.
Any other questions? Mr. Secretary, we do appreciate you taking time to come down today and bring these words. We appreciate you, and we value your opinion and appreciate what you had to say.
Thank you very much.
All right. And now, Mr. Michael Sullivan. You want to stand or you want to sit? We'll give you...
Well, I could use the exercise, Mr. Chairman.
He's wearing two hats today, but...
This is the point where they're going to take the cameras down because I have a face for radio.
They can leave the radio microphones up. Mr. Chairman, I come from a long line of preachers, and I got up this morning thinking that maybe I could give the altar call this morning that would get everybody to come forward and get right. Unfortunately, like many preachers in my family, I think y'all, instead of be sitting there thinking about lunch.
You going to pass the collection plate along?
Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. My name is Michael Sullivan. My day job, I'm the president and CEO of the American Council of Engineering Companies of Georgia. But I'm here today as the chairman of the Georgia Transportation Alliance, which is the transportation policy and advocacy arm of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. The Georgia Transportation Alliance is a broad-based and diverse coalition of companies and individuals who understand that addressing Georgia's transportation infrastructure is critical to Georgia's economic development efforts to attract, retain, and create jobs in Georgia, and to ensuring that Georgia remains a destination of choice for businesses and individuals who want to be part of a vibrant and growing economy. I just have 5 points that I want to make, 5 points this morning. Point one, this is not about transportation infrastructure. That may seem odd, since that's the name of the committee, but transportation is merely a means to an end. This is about jobs. This is about economic development. That's what we're here for. This is about Georgia's ability to remain competitive as our surrounding competitor states have made significant investments in their transportation infrastructure. This is about Georgia's ability to continue to attract and retain high-wage jobs. This is about making sure that Georgia residents' property values continue to go up because we continue to be a place where people want to move and buy their homes. Our transportation and logistics infrastructure is one of the factors that has allowed our state to build a global economy, to attract Fortune 500 companies, and to share Georgia products with the world. It is an asset that we can never take for granted, and one that we must continually be focused on not only maintaining, but on expanding and improving. The members of the General Assembly who are here in this room and Governor Deal deservedly have done much to position us to continue to be the destination of choice for business. Governor Deal and the General Assembly continue to look for ways to improve Georgia's tax and regulatory environment. And each of you, members of the General Assembly and Governor Deal, can rightly be proud of all the recent rankings in leading national publications that call us the #1 state to do business in. But if a business can't get its goods or its employees safely, efficiently, and predictably from point A to point B, all the pro-business policies in the world will only get you so far. When we talk about improving the connections between the various parts of our state, when we talk about improving the quality of life by reducing congestion, all of that is really about being a place that people want to live, work, and play, and where businesses want to locate and invest. It's about jobs. It's about economic development. Second point, I hope that this is not a process about coming up with a list of projects. One thing we have no shortage of in Georgia is plans for solving Georgia's transportation crisis. You could fill a lovely bookshelf full of 3-ring binders of all of the plans that we have that have been commissioned over the years, and no matter how many times we study different plans, the project list looks pretty much the same every time. Commissioner Golden was here just a few moments ago, rattling off a list of major projects that everyone in this room knows would move the needle on improving Georgia's transportation system. 285 and 400 interchange, 75 and 16 interchange, 316 interstate status from Athens to 85, improving access to I-95 from the Port of Savannah, the Fall Line Freeway, connecting Valdosta and Albany, improving highways 27 and 441 so that they become viable ways to keep goods and people that are not going to Atlanta from having to go through Atlanta. The list goes on, and most of you can recite the list by heart. The reason those projects keep popping up on all those three-ring binders is because most of those projects have been in those three-ring binders for decades. They remain, however, unfunded. Project lists also create the perception of a zero-sum game, and we certainly saw this in 2010, 11, and 12. You're talking about creating a new source of funding, but everybody thinks that it is the only source of funding, and if their project doesn't get on that project list, somehow it's never going to happen, not realizing that existing sources of funding remain. Project lists create that zero-sum game mentality, which can lead to some difficult politics. Now, I'm not an engineer, not a history major, I'm a poli-sci major, so math is not my strong suit. But I do work for engineers, and if I've learned anything about engineers, it's that they are wired to be rational, logical problem solvers. That's what engineers do. They solve problems through reason and logic. And one of the reasons that all those plans that sit in those three-ring binders on those bookshelves are so similar is that if you're looking at how to address our transportation needs from a rational, logical perspective, the conclusion of how to move the needle is going to be pretty similar. Now, you contrast that with the kind of list you might get if, say, a more political process-generated list. For the past several years, GDOT has consistently been ranked among the best DOTs in the nation in terms of delivering projects on time and on budget. We've got good plans drawn up by smart engineers, and we've got smart engineers at GDOT who know how to prioritize and implement those project lists. All we lack is the funding to deliver those projects. This shouldn't be about drawing up a new list of projects. This process should be about creating new sources of funding so that those existing plans could be implemented. Point 3, the federal cavalry is not coming. I think that's a point we've heard over and over and over again today. Commissioner Golden pointed out that we are too reliant on federal funding as it is. Frankly, we have relied on federal funding to the point that now 63% of GDOT's budget is coming from the federal government. And I think we've learned, as Congress has struggled for the better part of a year to try to fund the Highway Trust Fund, which was scheduled to go bankrupt, all they were able to do with all the smoke and financial mirrors was fund it through next May. They couldn't even fund it for an entire fiscal year. You cannot plan transportation projects around less than a year's worth of funding. The previous effort, MAP 21, was a 2-year bill. That is not a sustainable model, and we all know the federal government cannot continue to take infusions from the general fund and put them into the Highway Trust Fund. It is not a sustainable process, and we need to stop relying on the federal cavalry. They are not coming. They are not going to save us. Point number 4, this shouldn't be about short-term solutions. This should be about long-term solutions. Short-term thinking is what we've done for the past couple of decades. We decide we're going to fast forward, or we're going to free the freeways, or we're going to address a particular major infrastructure project. What that ends up doing in most cases is that gets funded by debt because we don't have that existing revenue stream to fund those projects, and that creates a situation where our existing revenue stream is further constrained by that debt service going forward. We don't need to get into short-term thinking. We need to get into long-term solutions because short-term thinking creates debt, and debt further exacerbates our funding crisis. And the last point I want to make is that fortune favors the bold. We are in Atlanta today and not Milledgeville because of transportation. Transportation turned Terminus into the capital of our state, and I'm going to say the capital of the South. Building that building across the street required vision and leadership. When we built that building and opened it in 1889, we were a very poor state. It was another 70 years before we could afford the gold for the Gold Dome from the wonderful city of Dahlonega. We were a poor state, but we built that capital, and it was a statement. It was a statement then. We built the world's busiest airport. That required vision, and it required leadership. I know, I wouldn't record it either. Deciding to be the city too busy to hate rather than following the example of some of our sister cities throughout the South required vision and leadership. You know, in 1960, Birmingham was bigger than Atlanta. We made a bold, visionary decision as a state that we were going to be the state too busy to hate, and Birmingham still hasn't gotten over it. Building the infrastructure that allowed us to become one of the fastest growing regions in the nation required vision. It required leadership. Bringing the 1996 Olympics to Atlanta required bold, visionary leadership. Now, it's time for us to address our 21st century infrastructure challenges. It's time to address them with bold, visionary leadership. In my opinion, Georgia has three major problems that face us that challenge our ability to execute on economic development. We all know what they are. Wet, right? Water, education, transportation. Those are our challenges. Water, gosh, I'm glad we're not trying to solve that problem. That's hard. Education, do you know how many school systems we have in this state? That's a hard problem to solve. Transportation, we got the easy one. We've got the plans. We've got a great agency that can implement those plans. All we got to do is create the funding. Then we can start calling it we, because you guys will have solved the T. All it requires is funding, and all that requires is the political will, the visionary, bold leadership to implement that funding, to create that funding. And I am hopeful that this committee is ready to roll up its sleeves and to do just that. And I can assure you on behalf of the Georgia Chamber and the business community of the state of Georgia that we are here to support you in any way that we can to make that happen. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions from any of the members? You must have done well, no, we got one. Hold on. Senator Lucas.
Are you willing to get out front and support increase in motor fuel tax when you have these legislators who got to go back in these districts and explain to their constituents why you raised the tax?
Well, Senator, I think if we make a compelling case for the why, the implementation is something that the voters would embrace. And we've got polling to back that up. We've got polling to back that up both at the federal level and at the state level. What we've got to do, though, is make the case that what's going to happen is really going to move the needle, that it's not a political process, but it's a rational, logical process designed to truly address Georgia's transportation infrastructure challenges and not just, generating funds and spreading them around.
But you got to understand, you can't take politics out of politics.
There's no way to take politics out of politics. That's right.
And so I'm asking you a question. Are you willing to put yourselves on the line if we were to ever take that step and say, look, this is what we got to do, we need it, whether or not you're going to be there, when the naysayers are going to be out there, where will you be?
We'll be right in the front of the line, taking the bullets for you. And we'll also be communicating around this state to make sure that the folks in your districts understand that why. I mean, that's the key, is you can't put the cart before the horse. You can't make the proposal without preparing the way at the grassroots level to explain to voters why this is necessary. And I'm just crazy enough to believe that if you do explain it and you do make the voters feel like that it's a plan that's truly going to move the needle, that the political blowback that I think a lot of people fear may not be as severe as you fear on the front end. But we'll be there. I can commit that to you.
Is that you, Ross? That Patton? Okay, Miss Patty. Good morning.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just curious to know, I represent House District 139, which is in one of the 3 regions in this state that passed the transportation SPLOST. If the state should move toward a gas tax increase, how would we convince those voters in that region of the state that it would be necessary? I'm just curious to know if we ever should go that direction. What suggestion could you give to me?
Well, what I would say is, if you're coming up with a list of projects that, again, kind of move that needle, let's use the example of the Fall Line Freeway. Fall Line Freeway can't be completed within the 3 regions that passed the Transportation Investment Act because there's a big hole in the middle there. Now, there may be some buyer's remorse where that hole is. They maybe would do the vote differently now if they had the opportunity, but you've got a hole there. You've got some other projects, 1675, for example, that would not only impact the specific region in which they're located, but would impact all of those regions and make a lot of things possible. So if you have a project list, or people believe that the funding will fund a project list, we've got the project list. It's a GDOT. Then I think you make the case that these things benefit everybody. It's really the opposite of what we did in 2010, 2011, 2012, which was very regionally focused. We were trying to address Georgia's statewide transportation needs, but we were doing it in this granular regional way that didn't really make any sense. Improving 16 and 75 benefits everybody in the state. Improving 316 to interstate status from 85 to Athens improves an entire region, not just those 3 or 4 counties where that's located. We got to make the voters understand that, and understand that for those regions that did pass it, they kind of get double the benefit. I mean, my understanding is that the folks in the 3 regions that passed it are pretty happy with what's going on right now, so they get that. Plus, they're going to get the benefit of all the statewide projects that would be funded by this new source of revenue. So I don't think it's a zero-sum game. It's a win-win.
Thank you.
As a former chairman of the state chamber,
Yes, sir,
this
Mr.
is
Chairman.
not home cooking, but I do want to say I applaud the chamber and the business community for putting it in the proper context about jobs and economic prosperity. And I think that's the major message that we're all going to have to make to the voters for them to accept a tax increase. But the gentleman earlier, I can assure you that Georgia business will step forward and support whatever measures are necessary, because we realize the criticality of the infrastructure that's needed. And you look at, I believe it was, how many billions total on that short list? 12 billion. That's just a short list. So I feel confident that I can tell you that the Georgia business community will be there to support you.
Who is 8? Representative Gardner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As a representative of the city of Atlanta, where congestion is a major issue, and getting around the city, not just to the city of Atlanta, but getting around the city is essential to us. I know we're not into a list of projects, but where does transit fit?
I think I maybe should have added a 6th point.
Thank you.
And if I could, revise and extend my remarks, as they say in Congress. Although I'll do it now instead of like 3 weeks later.
Or 6 months later.
Maybe or 6 months later. The 6th point maybe is that there shouldn't be a silver bullet mentality. I think whether we're talking about new funding sources, there may be multiple things that this committee needs to look at. The 4th penny, indexing, sales tax, a whole bunch of different stuff. There also need to be appropriate tools created to enable, because you have the federal role in transportation, and there is an appropriate federal role in transportation. There's a state role, but there's also a local role in transportation. How do we create new tools that allow local jurisdictions to come together and address what are truly local transportation issues? Do we eliminate the sales tax cap, for example, to allow counties that are up against the cap to continue to fund transportation improvements? Do we allow multiple counties to come together through a multi-jurisdictional SPLOST that allow them to address regional transportation issues that maybe aren't on the statewide list? Do we create fractional SPLOSTs? It may not require a penny. It may require a quarter of a penny. It may require a penny and a quarter. Do we allow jurisdictions to customize the revenue to fit the need? Allow, again, the right tool for the right job. So I think maybe the 6th point would be that there shouldn't be a silver bullet mentality that there's a one-page bill that's going to solve every problem. Maybe what we need to look at is filling a toolbox with tools, some of which will be direct funding, some of which will be enabling legislation that will allow local jurisdictions to do things like that. Is that responsive to your question, or?
Well, I think it does. It just sort of brought up another question in my mind, and that is to the extent that I-16 and 75 intersection needs addressing, which it clearly does.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is a statewide issue.
Absolutely.
I would argue that transit in the metro area is a regional issue that needs, that certainly has impact for the entire state.
I couldn't agree more. Certainly I don't think anybody would disagree that Atlanta is the economic engine of the state, and being able to continue to attract creative class and knowledge class workers to Atlanta by providing them a lifestyle that's more mobile, more walkable, is a huge part of Georgia's economic development efforts. Couldn't agree with you more.
Chairman Gooch, did you have I think any more questions for Sully? Thank you, Sully. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner, I think Chairman Gooch has a question for you.
The number $12 billion has been brought up today more than once. And as we leave here in our first meeting after today, we have to be careful to how do we quantify the ask. Because I saw an article in the Atlanta Journal this past weekend which had some good points. Is how much money do we need to fix, maintain, and expand our infrastructure in Georgia? And so when we leave here today, we don't want to say we know what the number is. It's $12 billion. I don't know if that's the correct number.
That was a short list.
It didn't have anything about public transit. It didn't have anything.
And I have a list of those things.
Half of that $12 billion is categorized as GRIP, cost to complete, and I don't know what's left in that. So I'd like to see a list of those projects sometime before our next meeting.
Sure.
But also, can you come up with a more definitive number? I'd like to see what is our goal? If we could just wave a magic wand, what would that number be? 5, 10, 20, 30 years, whatever our goal might be. Whether it's short term, there may be one number. Long term may be a different number. Capital costs may be a category, and then you have maintenance issues.
Sure.
But also, we haven't talked a lot, if any, about local governments, counties and cities, what's going on with their streets, because none of us can get home tonight just on a state route. It's very unlikely that any of us live on a state route. I may be the only exception in
now you
Dahlonega.
just debunked your point.
But now it's a city street because they took it away from the DOT, which the DOT doesn't have to maintain anymore. So my point is, what is that?
They didn't have to wrestle too hard.
You don't have that number today.
And then I think that number's the one that we've talked about before. If there is that number for what would it take to maintain the road system currently?
Yeah, and
without any expansion, just maintain the roads and the bridges that we currently have, what that number is, and then kind of you back in your $12 billion projects. I mean,
that was just showing you a list of the big projects that are out there.
That's
an example.
But that's my point. We don't need to lock in on $12 billion today. Because tomorrow's newspaper headlines should not read states looking for $12 billion. Because we don't know what that number is.
No,
yet,
I agree. And again, until you establish your priorities, I couldn't have agreed any more than some of the articles I've seen recently, which is, talk about what your needs are and then figure out that delta.
That's right.
And work towards those things. And again, this group can help us define what those are. But we talked a little bit, with you a couple of times about routine maintenance activities. That's a decision. This group is important for the state to look good. I mean, how important is that? And that number will be anywhere from 1 to X. I mean, whatever that number needs to be, we can fill those in. I think on rehabilitating the roads and resurfacing the state routes. I didn't really hit on it as much as I had planned to, but we only did 2.2% of the system last year, and that's not a sustainable number. We used to be in the 8 to 10% range, and so again, if I'm only going to resurface roads once every 50 years, you're not going to like the system you're going to see. We'd like the opportunity to come and present that. We have the tools to show this committee. If you invest this much, what the system would look like, what percentage would look good, fair, poor, what does that look like? And again, I won't call out any other states, but I can give you some examples.
One other request, if you could. This body over the years has given carve-outs and exemptions, sales tax exemptions, income tax exemptions, what have you. We also have exemptions on motor fuel tax. Could you get us a list of those and what the impact is to the bottom line on that?
Sure.
Thank you.
I don't know that you're through yet. Mr. Lindsay, I might have to cut your mic off. We're not in a courtroom today.
I've just asked a few questions.
No, I'm just playing. Go ahead.
Sort of building on what Chairman Gooch said, the figure I see here is $74 billion between now and 2035 in terms of our shortfall.
That was based on a statewide transportation plan that was done and I think rolled out in 2007, and I think Toby's working on a new plan as we speak.
Well, I look forward to seeing that too. And that $74 billion doesn't necessarily that's just what GDOT needs, right?
That was yes, it would have been based on a statewide initiatives.
And sort of building on what the representative over here had to say, that GDOT doesn't sort of look at transit issues. That's a different agency.
Well, we actually have those numbers. I know some of our annual needs both on the general aviation. I know what some of our annual needs are on transit in order to maximize some of our things. We have those numbers available.
Yeah, sort of building on what the chairman was saying. The best way for us to figure out how to get to some places and know where we need to go. So any details you can give us in terms of those figures would be most helpful.
You go ahead.
Commissioner, I got another question or comment. How could we quantify, and I understand what Secretary LaHood was saying this morning, that we should try to get the federal government to raise the federal gas tax. But I also get frustrated every time I read a newspaper article that says that some kind of a wildflower in the median of Georgia 400 has just been added to the endangered species list. And that just created another cost because we have to hire more environmental studies to be done. The Indiana bat, for example, we've spent up to $20 million already on studying something, looking for a creature that's not here. And so how much more of that can we expect from the federal government? So my point is, when can we quantify what it would take to quit sending our 18 cents a gallon to Washington, keep the money in Georgia? What could we do with that money more efficiently, faster, put it to work? And can we look at something like that? And can you give us some studies on that?
Yeah, and again, that's again one of those challenging questions. The devolution concept is certainly always out there for discussion, and I think that certainly the Georgia DOT and many local governments probably could say they would do it better than we would do it. But we think we could do a lot with that. I think we would get some efficiencies out of that. If they still call it a federal dollar, though, and it's got all the strings attached, and again, I guess our biggest concern is if they're giving other states $1.14 for every dollar they send up there, you need to consider that too. If the other states are getting a bigger return on their investment because they're getting money from the general fund, you need to take that into consideration.
It appears so. It's becoming harder and harder to get any kind of full-time permanent funding from Washington. So this last bill just passed the Senate. It kicked the can till May of next year.
Correct.
Okay.
With about 70% of the funding.
We'll probably expect to hear this same conversation about April of next year,
if
or March.
not sooner. Yeah.
And so our transportation committee meetings in the next session will probably sound a lot like what we're hearing today. So if all the states didn't send their 18 cents to Washington, maybe a portion of it was used for certain programs. I don't know of any major interstate projects that are ongoing right now that are federally funded. There's not any that I know of in Georgia that we're not taking care of. So what could we do with that? Is that a possibility? I know Congressman Graves has offered a resolution toward that effect. And could we be a pilot project for a program like that?
I mean, again, it comes back to that context of what are the strings going to be attached with the dollars? Right. If you're going to have the same hurdles, because it's still a federal dollar, and you still got to go through the same actual, processes and everything. And you don't get what I would call the leverage of, in a sense, not calling it a federal dollar anymore. I'm not sure what the efficiencies are today, and that's something we've talked about internally quite often. The concept of devolution, though, at the state level with all the DOTs is very, interesting.
Yeah. Chairman England.
Commissioner, going back to the sending a dollar up, getting $1.14 back, and all the strings that you mentioned that are attached, that kind of rings with me when we think about some of the things that when it is a federal project or federal money is used within that project, some of the things we have to do that we wouldn't do if we were funding it ourselves on the state level. So, that 14 cents, it may turn into a positive 25 cents because, I still think about when out riding around the state and come up to a red light at an intersection somewhere in the middle of nowhere, yet we have crossing protection and all of that for pedestrians, which, the only pedestrian that's going to be there is somebody's run out of gas. It's not like they're going across the street to a store. So I'd like to see a little bit of information of what it maybe cost us additionally when federal dollars are included. Look at the same project, price it our way versus the federal dollars, and just get an idea of what that percentage of savings would be.
Sure, certainly. But my point is if they still call it a federal dollar, and it's got all the same strings attached.
If we ain't sending it to them, it ain't going to be a federal dollar.
Exactly. That's the biggest concern I think most of us have. And I'd love to answer your other question though, which is the mysterious crosswalk. I get that question all the time, and the fact is it is a very wise decision, and it's not because of federal requirements, and it's not because of anything. And it actually makes the system work more efficiently. If you don't have a pedestrian, push button and crosswalk, you're supposed to assume a pedestrian is there walking at 3.5 feet per second across a big intersection. So those little side streets coming up off of like a 316 or somewhere, if a car pulls up on the side street, and activates the signal and shuts it down, right? Shuts it down. You are actually supposed to hold mainline red, assuming someone's walking at 3.5 feet per second across that long intersection. We argue that it makes the signal more snappy and efficient by putting that in, even though there's a cost associated with that because it can immediately go back to green. It's the pedestrian's responsibility to hit the button if they're there, so you can go back to mainline green very quickly. We get that question a lot.
I understand it on 316. Where I don't understand it's at Turner's Corners on 129 up in northeast Georgia mountains. So.
Yeah. Well, it may be that time of the year when they like to see the leaves change. More people up there, but the cost is about 40%. So, but that would be interesting to see those exact figures. With that, I think that we're going to let you sit down now, Commissioner, and maybe stay this time. We're going to shortly break for lunch. As you see, that we've got a pretty long lunch break, but we're going over and actually have lunch with Secretary LaHood. And also we wanted to give time to get there and get back. After lunch, you'll see that it is an open mic, and we encourage those. Hold on. All right, I'm going to let Senator Lucas.
Mr. Chairman, before we go, I think I hear folks talking, and it's all a lot of partisanship. And I'm probably one of the oldest guys in the General Assembly outside of Calvin. I took a 1 year sabbatical. We need to understand how we got to where we are. I mean, we keep talking about the feds, but let me just give y'all a breakdown so you understand that the legislature, the Georgia legislature, did part of this to DOT. Let me tell you what we did. When Joe Frank was governor, Joe Frank did not want to raise the motor fuel tax. And so we were doing good. So what we decided to do, we would take money out the general fund and pay part of DOT's debt service. That's what we did. It ended up being something like $180 million. And we had what we call LOC, the Local Road Assistance Program, and we made sure that they had that because you had the city contracts and the county contracts with the state. Well, the Olympics came. The Olympics came. And remember, we passed the fourth penny, but there was a fight between the speaker and the commissioner of DOT. It was about Highway 27 going all the way down the west side of Georgia, all the way to the Florida line. And we took that one penny and put it in the general fund. That's motor fuel tax. The Olympics came. Zell, the speaker, and the lieutenant governor, Pierre Howard, all agreed that they need to put money up for the Olympics. I think it was Shackelford then said, well, we can ease off and kind of halfway carry ourselves. We took $180 million, put in the Olympics. We said we'd give you the money back at a further date. Roy Barnes got elected. They didn't get the money back. You got $185 million right now with the 1 penny sitting in the general fund. So if you take that 180, if you can just go back and give them that $180 million, and that 185, that's close to 65 million. You could qualify for a little bit over $1 billion from the state, from the feds. But now let's remember, the feds gonna put the money in the Highway Trust Fund because most of them gonna leave if they don't put the money down there, because the construction end of highways and stuff supplies jobs for a lot of folks. But the Georgia General Assembly and the government put DOT in the position they're in now. Because now the money goes to Tollway Authority and it pays all the debt service, so they don't have a side thing. Like they were out of money in June, and we had sold $185 million out of the bond, so the governor agreed to do that. So it's not so much a Republican or a Democrat, but the General Assembly, by policies and what we did, put us in the situation that we find ourselves in now. And then on the T-Splotch, I'm in a region, we pass it everywhere, but you can't pass in Houston County. So we might well be out of it, but do you set up a region and set Houston County aside because they take all that splash money and do roads? So I think what we have to understand is there's a history of how we got to where we are not one person or one governor did it. We did it over a period of years just by setting policies and doing different things. So that's the reason we are here, but $185 million sits in the general treasury right now that doesn't go to DOT, and it's motor fuel. So we need to understand that we made those decisions, so therefore by policy, we are the ones who are going to have to change that policy if we really want to set transportation up and do some of these things that we need to do. And I just thought I need to mention that because I've been here long enough, and Calvin was here with me. He was the governor's flow leader at the time. We couldn't get that 1 penny in.
You didn't blame me for not doing it.
I appreciate those comments, Senator Lucas. I think that's what we're all trying to get at. And if you look, there's a reasons why we got the two of Chairman Appropriations sitting on the committee here with us as we go throughout the state. But thank you for those comments. With that being said, we're going to come back after lunch with an open mic, and truly want to hear from people and what they have to say. I know some may not make it back after lunch. I don't know why you wouldn't, because I know it's going to be just riveting. But I want to announce the schedule now in case you don't come back. I shouldn't say are not, this is not in stone because it pretty much is, but as with everything, they are subject to possibly change. We're going to do the next meeting will be held on August 25th, and will be held in the Dean of the House's district in Columbus. And his mayor's here. Where's our mayor? Stand up, and we're going to be in your hometown, and we appreciate the invitation for us to come, and we look forward to that. We thank you for coming up today as well. September the 2nd will be in Tifton, Georgia. September the 3rd will be in Macon. September 30th will be in Augusta. October 1st will be in Savannah. October 28th in Rome. And October 29th in Blue Ridge. We feel like this is pretty much spread out around the state and gives everybody an opportunity to be able to, within about 2 hours, to attend any meeting. And that's what we were trying to do, is take this to the people all around the state to give them an opportunity to have some say in that. So we encourage everybody to attend all the meetings if possible. And if you can't, try to make all that you can. We value your input, as well as our members of the General Assembly. Chairman Gooch, you have anything further to say?
We do encourage you to come back after lunch. We want to hear what you have to say. We want to get your input. Committee members will ask for your input and dialogue throughout the afternoon too. So please come back. Thank you.
And with that, we're going to adjourn for lunch. We'll see y'all back at 1:15. Okay. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to give everybody 5 minutes, and we're going to go down through here. And if you would, try to keep your comments to 5 minutes. If you want to be able to have any questions asked to you, try to stay within that time frame so we can move forward and make sure everybody gets an opportunity today. With that being said, we'll start off with the mayor of Macon and Bibb County, Robert Rackett. Thank you, Mayor.
You want me here there or down
you
there?
Can,
whichever one.
Whichever one you want to is fine with us.
I'll stand because I won't be long. Chairman Gooch, Chairman Roberts, members of the committee, and other distinguished members of the legislature, thank you very much for, number one, serving on this committee, but also for your foresight and taking up one of the most, I think, critical issues for the future of our state. We in Macon, Bibb County are very excited to have a member of the committee from our local legislative delegation, Senator Lucas, and we are thrilled that one of your meetings will be in Macon. I understand that the meeting of September the 3rd, so we are looking forward to hosting you in Macon on September the 3rd and looking forward to working with you and doing anything and everything that we can to help. Number two, a second point, I would say, that as you consider alternate methods of funding for transportation, I hope you won't overlook the opportunity to consider alternate forms of transportation. All too often, the funding in the past, as Senator Lucas mentioned earlier this morning, has been locked by a constitutional amendment into nothing but roads and bridges. And while I certainly admit roads and bridges are the most important and probably deserve the lion's share of funding in infrastructure improvements, other forms of transportation are increasingly important and will be even more increasingly important in the future of our state. I was sitting here this morning with the mayor of Columbus, Muskogee County, Teresa Tomlinson. She and I both have a passion for passenger rail, inner city passenger rail, between our respective city and Atlanta. And I think you're only going to see an increasing push for local transit options and for inner-city connectivity throughout the state. So as you consider funding sources, beware of the trap that a lot of times the funding is locked constitutionally into only certain forms of transportation, and I hope you'll try to find ways to keep other forms of transportation on the table so that we can discuss them, whether they be aviation, whether that be inner-city passenger rail, transit, bicycle paths, all these other things that are becoming increasingly important. The third thing that I would say is that I am happy to be the incoming chairman of the Transportation Policy Committee for the Georgia Municipal Association. This is a brand new role for me, and I look forward to working with Lamar Norton and other members of the Georgia Municipal Association. But remember, because Macon-Bibb County is a consolidated government, I wear two hats. So I am also in the ACCG, and I'm going through training in both. So I'm going to be doubly trained and doubly refined. But I want to tell you, I think that both Lamar Norton and Ross King being on the committee is one of the smartest things that you can do, because I know that local communities stand ready, willing, and able to share their part of the burden because they reap a tremendous part of the benefit. So don't overlook options like tax allocation districts that could be set up around transit stations or stops, the revenue from which can go to offset maintenance and operation on an ongoing basis. I think you would find local communities willing to stand up and share their revenue that they can generate for you with a tax allocation district around stations and stops to help finance some of these transit options that I mentioned. Look forward to seeing you in Macon, and again, thank you very much for your service.
Thank you, Mayor. Any questions for the mayor real quick? He's got a few minutes. My former House member, your delegation guy on this committee that you asked about.
What can I say?
Senator Lucas.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, on a number of splash projects that it's written in as to what you had to spend that money on when you do it. Georgia is one of the few states that allow local governments to get that extra penny on motor fuel. Does the government itself, can it determine to take that money and spend it on transit, like public transit, your buses and stuff, or does it have to go to those designated projects that you would have tied up in a SPLOST?
The fourth penny is into lost and goes into the general fund. So on the local level, we spend that fourth penny, and we do subsidize the Macon Transit Authority with our general fund. So the transportation, but SPLOST is a little different in that you have special purpose options that are written into the ballot, and you got to spend the money for only those SPLOST projects there. So we're talking about two different buckets of money. My understanding is that fourth penny goes into lost, which goes into the general fund, not splost and tracked separately.
So in other words, the SPLOST doesn't get a chance to get part of that money off that motor fuel when you sell it?
The SPLOST, well,
I mean, if you got your loss, in other words, if you know they run throughout the years and then they end and that kind of thing. So if you got a SPLOST vote,
somebody smarter than I am going to have to tell you whether or not the SPLOST enjoys any part of sales tax on motor fuel.
Okay.
I'm not smart enough to answer that for you.
All right.
I don't know whether it's calculated in it and remitted to us by the Department of Revenue or not. But I can just tell you, whatever we get as far as SPLOST dollars has to be allocated to just those special purpose projects that were listed on the ballot. Lost in that fourth penny, any sales tax that we get off of that just goes into the general fund. And yes, we do subsidize a lot of transportation out of it.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Next, Steve Brown, Chairman of Fayette County. And if I mispronounce or if I don't read it just correct, just forgive me.
Luckily, I got an easy name.
You do. You do.
Everybody likes calling me up.
That's right.
Thank you for allowing me the opportunity, and I wanted to thank Senator Gooch on that 11.2 cents to just make sure that we did say that a lot of that does go to local road match. Also goes to things, I'll give you an example of something we're doing in Fayette County. We're using a portion of that sales tax money to actually loan our stormwater utility the money to do $4 million in dam repairs, too, that the state's mandating that we do. So we use that money. I would hate to say that we'd even consider withdrawing any of that. But also, too, I wanted to bring up to you, and I put a sheet on your dais up there, and unfortunately I didn't know we hadn't expanded, so I didn't have enough for everyone. But on autonomous vehicles, I did an op-ed in the paper today, so if you want to look it up, it's in the AJC today. But Fayette County has signed a resolution to be an exploratory laboratory for autonomous vehicles, allowing the use of our county roads. It would give these manufacturers essentially 176 square miles of space to do the testing, manned testing of their vehicles. Google's now developing 200 vehicles of their own for city and county road purposes. They go about 30 miles an hour, no steering wheel, no gas pedal, no brake. And it's an exciting time to be in, but they're all manned, it's all safe. Somebody asked me, they said, well, what's the liability purpose? The liability is you being in the car, driving. These cars have driven 800,000 miles on California highways with no accident. Not only does that car not run into another vehicle, it also doesn't allow another vehicle to run into it. So you're much safer with some of this technology than you are with some of these people texting and driving at the same time. So I say all that to say we would love to have the legislature support. We would love to have DOT support to allow us to use the state routes in our county to be part of this effort, because we can't do it unless we have the state routes as part of that equation. Johnson County, Iowa, we were the first in the nation to do this resolution, and Johnson County, Iowa did it the exact same night. That's home to the University of Iowa. They have a Transportation Safety Institute, the University of Iowa, and they want those research and development dollars, the high-tech jobs coming in, and the notoriety of being an early adopter just as bad as we do in Fayette County and metropolitan Atlanta. They're ready to jump on this, so I hope we are too. That's all that's in there. On the transit side of the transportation funding, I'm often seen as a critic of transportation, but just to let you know, I'm the only ARC board member that actually rides transit. So I do have a user experience when I'm talking about it, and I would like to say I talk as an experienced, not only someone who studies it, but someone who actually uses the transit. I think we've got to work on a sustainable program, and I see the transit funding in years forward. It's just a black sucking hole that all this money is going to get sucked down, and we're not going to be able to fund these systems. Expanding heavy rail really scares me because we're having a hard time doing O&M on the existing system that we have today. The Greta bus system used to be county funded. It was county and federal funding. The county somehow got out of the funding equation. The federal money's going away, and now it's state funded. The rates are unusually low for the fares. I think you should raise those fares. There's going to be a capital crunch with the Greta bus system. They bought all the buses at one time. That rat is going through the snake, and eventually it's going to surface. And we need to make sure that you can handle that capital crunch. But projects like when we spend $100 million on a 4-car streetcar system, I don't have any problems with the city of Atlanta wanting to do that as long as I don't have to pay for it. And my citizens in Fayette County don't have to pay for it. You can do whatever project you want to do in your own jurisdiction. I'm absolutely happy with it. But if we're going to ask a region or a state or some entity to cover the cost of all these things, I think we need to be practical. We need to come up with a threshold for what is the cost, the appropriate cost per rider for this technology. Perhaps it's not trains, perhaps it's bus rapid transit, perhaps it's something else. But there is no threshold right now for where do we draw the line on cost per rider with transit. And we need to have one. No business model exists without this. So I think you need to have that and make that determination. The fourth penny needs to go back into transportation. I've heard endless people in the legislature say this. I think everyone at the local level is saying this, and I'd love to see the fourth penny go back. Flexibility with the sales tax, I think, is a good thing. I support the legislation Ed Setzler put forward in sessions past that said you can choose your own region. It's easier for me to get together with the 3 counties adjoining mine and agree on our set of projects and our problems and identify those and repair those. It's hard for somebody in Gwinnett County to really care what's happening in Fayette County, and it's hard for somebody in Henry County to really care about what's happening in Cobb County. But Cobb, North Fulton, Douglas, they can all get together and decide on what they want to do. And I think that's probably a better model. It's a lot more flexible. The vehicle miles traveled model, I think, is a good thing. You wouldn't get much money out of me. I don't travel very far to work. You'd make a fortune off my wife. And, I think that's a model that we need to look at. The technology is now there to where you can track all that. I think that's a model worth pursuing. And I would also suggest, in terms of the transit, look at the orange line in Los Angeles, California. They were very unreceptive of having that line put in. They did it anyway. It cost $324 million, and it's a huge success. Very low cost, higher ridership, high approval rating. Thank you.
Okay. I will give you some latitude to ask a question if you want to ask the question.
I just wanted, real quickly, you gave us a lot of good specifics except on transit. Based on your study and your concerns, what is the most cost-efficient forms of transit?
Well, one thing I think we need to look at is, geographically, Atlanta doesn't work well as a transit.
Yeah.
Manhattan is the perfect transit corridor. Atlanta doesn't work. So I think you've got to look at what's going to function. I think the autonomous vehicles are actually going to create capacity on roads we already have, which then allows you to turn money that you'd spend on expansion back into maintenance on your road system, which we're having a hard time coming up with the maintenance funding on roads. But scalable, for example, Concept 3, the mass transit plan for regional Atlanta, it had bus rapid transit and commuter rail going into Fayette County. We have 107,000 people.
Yeah, I understand what you don't want. I'm just trying to figure what you do want. That's all.
Well, I think it needs to be scalable. I think you could look at small Sprinter vans coming from like a Peachtree City or a Fayetteville and going to the airport because we have a large aviation community in Fayetteville. That might actually work, and you could actually afford to fund that. But bus rapid transit and commuter rail in Fayette County, you're throwing your money away. And that was actually in the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Lady May, Jeff Cannon. Not here? Okay. I don't know if he's not here. Okay. Then we'll move forward. I don't know if I can spell the first word, say the first word, I'm trying to read it, but McCorkle from the Sierra Club? Is that?
Yes, I'll say the mic.
Yes, ma'am, please. I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Briante McCorkle, and I'm with the Georgia Sierra Club.
Boy can spell it, pronounce it. You can't. You're from South Georgia.
That's
why.
It's difficult to
We're not
pronounce.
Yankees.
You'll see my face. Just call me Bree. Bree's fine.
Thank you, ma'am.
So yeah, I am the transportation organizer for the Georgia Sierra Club. The chapter has a long history of involvement and advocating for transportation solutions. We want to begin by emphasizing that we need to focus on providing travel options, not fighting congestion. Traffic congestion is simply a necessary byproduct of thriving cities. The most forward-thinking regions have moved beyond the red herring of congestion relief and are instead focusing on giving residents meaningful alternatives to sitting in traffic, particularly by making walking, biking, and mass transit viable options for more people. As has been mentioned and acknowledged earlier at this meeting, these investments, coupled with smart land use and development decisions, create bustling centers of activity, dense commercial and residential centers that will bolster economic development. So for the past 2 years, the chapter has consistently promoted a framework for transportation progress centered on 3 major themes. The first of the themes is to put the house in order, and that's to ensure an equitable, accountable, and trustworthy transportation governance framework prior to investing billions of taxpayer dollars. This has been partially addressed. Take MARTA as an example. 2 years ago, the anchor of our region's transit system was in rough shape. The agency was running a structural deficit in tens of million dollars. Bus and rail service had been cut to the bone in relations between MARTA and the state, where they had hit a low. What happened at MARTA in the last 2 years is nothing short of remarkable. The deficit has been erased, service is being restored, and a new culture of openness and accountability has been established at all levels. Improvements such as this set the stage for our second theme, which is to pursue funding that makes sense. We need to focus on maintaining and effectively utilizing our existing revenue streams and assets, and any new transportation funding sources should be tied to land use. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But yes, any new funding services sources should be tied to use and travel behavior to the greatest extent possible. For starters, are we seriously considering reclaiming the fourth penny of the gas tax? And if so, that should be used for all transportation options, not just roads. Also, in the last legislative session, as was mentioned, there were a flurry of solutions that were more targeted towards the local level. We saw an exception for the sales tax cap in Clayton County, which paved the way for the November MARTA referendum. We also, Michael Sullivan earlier even suggested lifting that sales tax cap entirely for counties that might be hitting the same problem into when we need to. And that sets the stage for the third theme, which is to emphasize incremental, locally driven strategies rather than a one-size-fits-all, top-down approach. We need to focus on step-by-step, results-oriented progress that responds to the needs and desires of Georgians. Clayton County has been, a really great example of this. The recent decision by the commissioners to put MARTA on the ballot was definitely a huge moment for transportation funding in the Atlanta region, but it was definitely a local approach. 2 years after the commission dismantled the critTrans system in 2010, Clayton County voters elected new leadership, and that is Commissioner Jeff Turner and Commissioner Shana Rooks. Both ran on a pro-transit platform. They commissioned a transit feasibility study that engaged thousands of Clayton residents. They listened to what they had to say about where and what the mobility needs were and how they should be met. And that study eventually supported the idea that residents both wanted and were willing to pay for transit, and specifically MARTA. From there, so the commissioners listened to their constituents. It wasn't the product of backroom dealing or top-down decision-making. They responded to abundant and persistent pleas at public meetings. And although it still remains to be seen if the referendum passes, one packed meeting after another ensures me that the Clayton residents feel invested in this process and they will see it through. And so that's really all I have to say. I'm going to sum up there. As long as we adhere to these three themes and we continue to emphasize that it's not about relieving traffic congestion, but it's about providing transportation alternatives, then I think we'll be in a good shape as we move forward on transportation in the state.
Thank you. Any quick questions? All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right. Let's see. Miss Benita Dodd.
Did you see what our Sierra Club lady did? I saw what she did, that subliminal message. Pardon me, I just lost my train of thought. My name is Benita Dodd, and I am Vice President of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, and we are a state-focused think tank. We propose limited government and free market solutions. And I've been sitting here this morning and this afternoon and listening to all the speakers, and it was very interesting listening to Mr. LaHood especially, because the last time I heard him speak live in Atlanta was to announce that he was providing funds for solar panels on the MARTA garage. And so it's a little scary to hear him say, let's raise the gas tax 14 cents and send it to Washington, and maybe they'll have the courage to stand up and do the right thing. That's very concerning to me, and I am behind what Mr. Golden said earlier today, which was that we need to wean ourselves, to the extent that we can, off the federal teat. clearly we are having a huge struggle getting funding from there. We're getting, we are unable to prioritize our needs. And once again, what Mr. Golden said was, we need to establish our needs and then prioritize those. And from what happened with the T-Splost a few years ago, voters clearly felt that that was not done. We really do appreciate, as the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, representing the taxpayers of Georgia, we really do appreciate what you are doing, coming together finally and acknowledging that we have to do something, because so many of the solutions have to come out of the legislature. We were very worried earlier this year when one of the private solutions that is growing here in the Metro Atlanta area suddenly looked like we were going to see some breaks, and that was Uber and Lyft. Those kinds of private solutions mean a lot to the voters of Georgia, to the commuters of Georgia, to the travelers of Georgia. Mr. Golden also mentioned that we're looking in Georgia at a lot of PPPs. We've had a rocky track record when it comes to PPPs, and we've scared off, quite frankly, quite a few of the investors. But the issue is very clearly that we need to look at those, and not just because they may be cheaper, but because they may deliver quicker and they may have a better performance record. So that is one of the things that we have to absolutely look at, especially knowing what is happening at the federal level and the funding level, the funding from the federal level. We know that also what needs to come out of the Georgia legislature is looking at that fourth penny and looking at a fractional tax. And these are things that you can do. We need to prioritize and let local governments know that if you want local government solutions that do not focus on mobility and congestion relief, then you need to find local funding for those local solutions, for those local wants, as opposed to the needs that we have as a region. And I think that comes once again from prioritizing. Now, the Georgia Public Policy Foundation has worked on our issues for 2014, which we're hoping that the legislature will be looking at in the 2015 session. And one of our segments is on transportation. And you can find it at georgiapolicy.org on our website under Guide to the Issues. I hope you'll all take a look at that, and I hope that you'll call on the Georgia Public Policy Foundation if you do need some policy guidance, policy advice, and policy perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you. You got a question from Chairman Gooch.
One question. I've been to several of your meetings and breakfasts in the past. Do you have any substantial thoughts on dollars? I mean, you're talking about 180 million for the fourth penny. I think we all want to reach for that goal quickly, but that's really just a scratching of the surface.
Yes, that is. Well,
what would you do to generate $12 billion or $8 billion or $3 billion over the next 10 years? Do you have any suggestions?
Well, clearly we're going to look at more user fees, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I was listening to the talk about raising the gas tax, but at the same time the legislature keeps funding, subsidizing electric vehicles. So we have to look at user fees to the extent that we can, hot lanes, the express toll lanes. We have to start looking at what is going on around the state, around the nation, and whatever we can fund through user fees, we must look at that. So many other states are looking at. People are perfectly willing to go to Florida and ride on those toll lanes on the way to the beach, for example, but we'll gripe about us. That's one of the things that we have to do. The private investment is also another thing that we really need to look at.
Would the Public Policy Foundation support user fees on existing roadways or just on new roadways?
Yes, we would. We understand how unpopular that is and what a bad PR battle it is. You just have to look at 316 and what happened when there was a proposal to toll that. But the fact of the matter is that, as Mr. LaHood said earlier, our interstate system, for example, is 50 years old. Can you imagine how much of the interstate is underdeveloped as far as today's technology, as far as ITS, as far as just new ways of moving people. So first of all, we have to look at those new enhancements and maintenance, and we're never done with it, especially with the 50-year-old system. So as unpopular as that is, and as the way people believe that we've paid for those old roads already, you can't tax us on it again. I think as long as we look at offering a viable alternative pathway for motorists that doesn't punish them, whenever they are willing to pay for that choice of a toll road, an express toll road, I think we have to take that option from now on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dodd.
Thank you.
Mr. Bill Hudson.
Co-chairman, committee members, thanks for letting me speak today. I listened to everything here today regarding how to go about funding transportation, and I liked what Mr. Golden said about us getting off of, taking government money, because the strings that are attached to it, nobody in their right mind wants to have to deal with. And so if we don't take, and he said, we need to get off this. So I went up and talked to him about it afterwards, and he said, well, I didn't say we don't quit taking federal money altogether, but we just don't need to be dependent on it. Well, that's an oxymoron, because if you're going to take it, you're going to be dependent upon it. And so I think that what happens when they take it, whether it's municipal, county, state, they become addicted to it like crack cocaine, and they've got to have it whenever it's available. So I just think that we need to look at that. I think that probably the best thing to do is don't send the money to the feds in the first place, and then you don't have any strings attached. So all these alphabet agencies are not constitutional anyway. They're not in the Constitution. They're not in the 18 enumerated powers. And Judge Roberts, with the Supreme Court in the Obama opinion, said that we don't have to do what the federal government sends down to the states. If it's something that we don't want to do and we don't contract with them, then we can tell them, no, we're not doing it. Take your thing and go back home. So I think that that's what needs to, you're talking about the federal legislators, having the gumption to do the right thing. And I think that in the state here, you need to do the right thing too, and need to be able to tell, just because the federal government says that they're sending it down or they're offering it or whatever, we don't have to do it. So that's pretty much all I have to say.
Mr. Hudson, who are you with? Or you just
Transportation Leadership Coalition. I'm the treasurer.
Okay. Transportation Leadership Coalition?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
LLC.
Chairman Gooch.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. I agree with the concept of not sending our federal money to Washington if we can keep it. The question I have, though, is how do we not send it to Washington if it's a federal tax? We're not collecting. It's collected and sent to Washington. And if we don't ask for it back, then are we going to continue to send the tax up there and not receive it? I'd like to not send it up there and try a pilot project where we can keep it here at home. I think we can do better. I think we can spend the money wiser without all the strings attached, without a lot of the unnecessary environmental studies that have been brought down to us. So I guess my concern is we can't just ignore federal law and expect the feds to just say, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. We'll get the money from the rest of the states. So how do you suggest we do that? Because I'm with you on what your concept is, but I'm not sure how we do it logistically.
Isn't the money collected by the state internal revenue and then sent up there?
It is, but it's collected as a law of the federal government. Well, it's not a mandate of the state; it's a mandate of the feds.
Okay. I'm not exactly sure how we go about doing it. But I'm also saying that it's not impossible. If the feds don't touch it, I don't think it's their money that they can tie all the strings to it. So I'm not, I haven't figured out exactly how to do it yet, but I think that some research into that could be done. And,
I guess the other part of that too is, what if we decided we don't think we should be sending 38% of our income to the federal government? Should we just not send the income tax there either? You know what I'm saying? That's obviously not going to happen.
Right.
But if we individually don't file a tax return, you know what happens to us. They come and knock on our door. So
the contract is when you sign your income tax form. If you don't, if you just send the form in and don't sign it, put your address or whatever and don't sign it, then you don't have a contract with them.
So we don't have to pay them?
No, I'm not saying that you don't have to pay them. If you don't want to get in trouble.
You're not a lawyer, are you?
No.
I'll get you to do my tax returns.
Anything else?
I want to hear some more about that, though. And we talked to Congressman Graves in detail about it. He'd like to pursue that as well.
Yeah, I like his way of thinking on that.
Thank you.
Hold on, you got Mr. Sullivan.
Just teeing on the chairman's comment about Congressman Graves' devolution bill. So would you be in favor of new revenue being generated in Georgia if it increased if it decreased our dependence on the federal revenue stream?
Yeah, I think that you could sell that to the people. I mean, the people don't want to increase taxes, and that was obvious with the ill-conceived T-Splosh with all kinds of projects on there that, the head of transportation for the ARC said that, in a meeting up in Cherokee, he said, well, nobody is going to save any time in traffic with these projects. And we've been trying to get him to say it forever, and when he said it, we're like, he finally said it. So that was the reason that I think that one of the reasons that failed. But if people could say, well, I think if you told the people, we're going to cut the federal government out of this, and we're not going to have all the strings that are attached with what we get back from them, I think that and so because of that, we're going to have to increase. I don't know if we need to do it 10 cents or whatever, but if you're going to go to a usage tax, a sales tax, and get rid of the state income tax, I mean, you can't have all these splots, because if you do, you're going to be in double-digit sales tax real quick, and I think that's unacceptable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Josh Waller, Georgia DOT.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to take a second, since Commissioner's not here, and I think there was 2 comments about what he stated during his testimony, just sort of to give some clarification. We're talking about federal dependency, federal funds. Right now, as he laid out our budget, our entire capital program, we're actually talking about resurfacing roads or building new roads, are completely federalized. So that means that when we talked about that $250 million that goes to capital construction, capital maintenance, that's to achieve the match. What the commissioner, the examples that we've been citing is, you could have the scenarios where we have devolution and we no longer have, it's retained here. But I think the commissioner's other comments were towards states like Florida, where they have enough other revenues to be able to do their capital program outside the federal scope. And so what that does, it allows you to deliver a capital project or expansion or widening, new road, and then what you do is you take the federal dollars that you're still receiving, because Georgians still pay that tax, and you put that on resurfacing, which resurfacings are a lot easier to do. You're looking at less environmental. And so that's the way to more strategically utilize federal dollars, as opposed to having your complete program, both capital and maintenance, dependent on the federal program. So just wanted to add that sort of as a clarification, since I know the commissioner's comments have been referenced. So thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Steve McWilliams, Georgia Forestry.
Thank you, Chairman Roberts, Chairman Gooch, and members of the study committee. My name is Steve McWilliams. I'm with the Georgia Forestry Association, not the Georgia Forestry Commission, which most people think, but the Georgia Forestry Association. We are a 2,000-member trade association advocating for the forestry industry, all sectors of the forestry industry, located in Forsyth, Georgia. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm going to speak very, very briefly, and we're going to follow this whole process, and have given the opportunity later on in some of the subsequent meetings we may be inclined to want to comment additionally. Almost hesitated to sign up because I don't want the points that I plan to make today to in any way be taken as my diminishing the importance of other interests that have appeared before you today and that will appear before you, because I think all of the issues that have been brought to your attention demand equal support and interest and study. But I would like to focus a little bit more on a very specific situation relative to local roads. And I appreciate, Chairman Gooch, your comments this morning relative to the local funding and your emphasis in that area. Just as a little background, Georgia's forestry community represents the largest, we are the largest commercial forestry state in the country. According to a study that Georgia Tech does annually for the Georgia Forestry Commission, forestry in the state contributes about $29 billion to the state's economy, and that represents about 150,000 jobs across the state. There are, in support of this $29 billion industry, there are conducted in this state approximately 7,000 to 8,000 timber harvests every year. And a timber harvest is removing the wood product from the woods, getting it across local roads to a state road, and ultimately to its first point of process, to a mill, a pulp and paper mill, a sawmill, engineered panels factory, or a pellet mill. So local roads typically, by far, are where our trucks first hit the road. And relative to that, a couple of things that I want to say that might add some emphasis to the need to not let local roads and local transportation funding, have less priority perhaps than all other interests that you're going to hear from. I might suggest, it was suggested earlier, and I want to tell you, I'm not a transportation expert, so there are many finer points that I certainly can't debate with you, but it was mentioned earlier that some of the local sales tax programs, for example, don't have any kind of mandate on how much of the revenue collected must go toward transportation. So I would suggest, if it is possible, that be something that the study committee consider too. If transportation really does have the kind of priority that it should in the state of Georgia, then perhaps that we ought to actually put some mandates on some of that local money, and it should go toward local transportation, roads and bridges. Any state money that goes toward local funding, I would suggest, should be tied to local roads that are built to certain standards. One of the problems that we have in our industry, and I'm not here today to defend anyone who drives a truck and hauls overweight, that's not my point. But it is fact that in many of our counties, when roads are resurfaced or reconstructed, they are not necessarily reconstructed to a standard that will allow commerce, whether it's a load of timber, whether it's a load of row crops of various kinds, because a lot of what I'm talking about applies to general ag as well. So that we would suggest that any money that goes to local communities ought to be tied to a standard in construction of those and maintenance of those roads. And then finally, on a point of safety and efficiency, Georgia has a number of roads, many of them, a number of bridges. Many of them are deficient or they're obsolete, and probably the majority of those, vast majority of those, are bridges that are part of local road systems. And so that we would also like to suggest that an emphasis be placed on looking at funding for bridges, particularly in rural Georgia. Again, from a safety standpoint and also an efficiency standpoint, so that counties are not inclined to have to post bridges that may require that we travel 50% or 100% further than we would otherwise have to travel in order to reach the mill that we're taking our product to. So having said that, I'll leave it with that unless there are questions, and then we'll, again, follow the process, Mr. Chairman, and comment later as we see how things develop.
Thank you, Steve. We appreciate you. Thank you, Desmond. All right, Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Chairman Gooch and Chairman Roberts and distinguished study committee members. And I want to say a very special thank you for this is the right thing to be doing at the right time for the right reasons. I represent the Perimeter Center, Georgia's Fortune 500 Center. I am the president and CEO of the Community Improvement Districts. I serve on the executive board also of the Georgia Transportation Alliance. In 1999, Perimeter Center would have been considered to be the poster child of what not to do. It was a congested, disconnected, very, very unproductive employment growth center. Today, Perimeter Center is the top center of the Southeast United States for Fortune 500 companies. It is because of a transportation infrastructure agenda. Our commercial property owners have been self-taxing themselves for 15 years on a path to move forward. Every agency in the state has been engaged, from Greta to MARTA to CERTA to the Department of Transportation. We can point to the first innovative diverging diamond that's now a 40% improvement of traffic throughput after being online in 2 years, built in 2 years. We can point to a Hammond half diamond ramp system on Georgia 400 that was accelerated by a $5 million commitment of the Perimeter CIDs that is now staging the full corridor where State Farm will be building $1 billion worth of real estate investment and 5,000 jobs staging since over the years of 2015 to 17 as we speak. It will be major new tax digest for the state. So I'm saying to you all as members, it's not a one fix, it's a menu. And I'm very happy to see that we're having several discussions of different funding sources that will make out the pie, because the pie can be leveraged by the corporate community to put product on the ground, and that will sustain us with economic development. At the Perimeter, we are championing through a partnership, the Georgia 400 285 partnership. There are already 5 or 6 mayors signed on to this partnership. We have every congressman, every senator. We have all the corporate community from the Perimeter to support it. The CID is putting $10 million into the package of the I-285 400 package that will be forwarded as a priority for the state. It is about need and not want. So when I'm listening today, I just want to underscore, if we address the needs, we'll free up the resources to get to the wants. And I really believe that at Perimeter, you won't hear us talking about just the highway, or you won't just hear us talking about the road or the bridges. We're going to be talking about transit with MARTA. MARTA is the backbone of what all these companies are looking for when they're bringing in these employees to be centered around these MARTA stations. And that vision can go forward. That vision can go towards a rapid transit bus system that connects across top end 285 that we envisioned 10 years ago, and we had the plans to look at it, and it would connect everything from Cumberland to Perimeter to Doraville. It would go to North Fulton, and it would create the spine that we need to have an east-west connection to MARTA to build that transit asset. So my point is this. It's multimodal. It's the ports of Savannah. It's the Hartsfield Airport. It's the Georgia Corporate Center. It's the intersections, the sidewalks, the low-hanging grants that Greta and CERTA have provided. It's the express bus system. Georgia's got the menu. All we've got to do is put the menu together and the pie pieces together of the funding system. So I'm happy to serve and happy to be a spokesperson for the public-private model that's working for the state, where other CIDs have enjoyed the benefit of seeing that model and implementing their CIDs, and the ability to keep spreading the taxpayers' dollars to a better model of the private sector being at the table. And that is a true story, and a story that people embrace and they want to hear. So we're very happy with this committee and your due diligence to make this decision and make this capital effort happen in the 2015 session. Thank you.
Hold on 1 second. You've got a...
Yes, ma'am. Sir.
Sully.
Yvonne, if there were state legislation that would enable cross-jurisdictional SPLOSTs, would that be of benefit to the Perimeter CIDs? And if so, how? And if not, I guess the answer is no.
Yes, because we already are two CIDs together. And so we are governed by boards of 2 separate CIDs, but we implement projects cross-jurisdictionally. I also happen to be in an area where there's 5 governments across the Perimeter Center. So everything we do has to be implemented and executed among county and city cooperation. So there'd have to be intergovernmental agreements and that type model, but that can work. It's how we've had to do our business. So it is part of the business model.
Senator Beach.
Yes, Ms. Williams, thank you for being here, and thanks for all you do. Y'all do a great job down at Perimeter. If CIDs were allowed to cross jurisdictional lines and you wouldn't have to have 2 boards and 2 CIDs that you run, would that help you from a cost standpoint? Would you be able to invest more dollars as a CID if you didn't have to have 2 attorneys, 2 boards, 2 separate entities?
Well, I think that, yeah.
Huh? Well, no, I'm just asking the question. Does that add cost? Because one of the beauties about the CID, for those of you that don't know CIDs, I believe we have about 19 CIDs now, and in the metro area, 19 CIDs. And if you look at the dollars we bring in a year, it's about $60 million to $70 million. You're talking $360 million to $400 million over a 6-year life of a CID that they are putting into design, infrastructure, and so on, which jumpstarts a lot of projects. So the CIDs are a great model, but I just wondered if you were able to cross jurisdictional lines, if that would help in any way, shape, or form.
Well, in my case, we do cross jurisdictional lines, but we're restricted with our dollars by the home CID. My point there, Senator Beach, is that, yes, I think for a larger project, it would make sense to have CIDs participating. In my case, for Dunwoody and Sandy Springs, we have to deliver in those local governments as a CID. They do not have the kind of capital budgets that allow them to do the kind of projects that would be done in Perimeter. So I'm kind of on it both ways. We could do it from a larger project. We'd have to be home rule on the smaller projects because the local governments depend on the CID funds to be the capital to help accelerate those investments within the local jurisdiction. So for us, it's a kind of a complex discussion that would have to be weighed out.
Mr. Lindsay.
Just real briefly, and I want to echo what Senator Beach said in terms of your work, which is excellent. Let me ask you this. CIDs are basically business centers that we have, and a lot of the need is to try to move from one business center to another. Are you now permitted, and if not, would it be helpful for you to be able to permit it, to be able to join with, for instance, Perimeter, join with Cumberland, join with Buckhead, join with North Fulton, join with other ones to help build a system by which, transit system, for instance, by which you can go from one business center to another? Would that be helpful to you?
Well, that's the
Can
point.
y'all do it? And if not, should you be able to do it?
We started as I mentioned, we started with Cumberland an investment of $600,000 10 years ago to study the top end 285.
Yep.
So we were able to use our marketing funds to do that. If that were now in a state of being able to be implemented, you could make a case that the intergovernmental agreements between the top end CIDs or those attaching could have some sort of leverage factor that would go after state and federal funds for a system of connectivity. You'd have to have an intergovernmental agreement, and that would have to be the right structure now. But we've got examples of how these things could have been implemented as we were envisioning the activity center connectivity.
In the future, if you could sort of think about ways in which we could improve the law in Georgia to make those sort of cooperative agreements easier for you guys.
Opportunities.
Let us know.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. And with that, at this point, we are no longer. You have a question? I have a question. Well, being as you're the chairman, I think I'll let you go right ahead.
I'm sitting here listening about the CIDs, and I don't have a CID in my district.
You don't have one?
No, we have CDs in our district,
Okay.
certificates of deposit.
Good. I need to come up to your district.
I'm curious if the federal pot, which we know is basically empty, they've extended it 6 months or 8 months till May, and we know that it has a limited number of dollars in it. And we heard the commissioner say that $273 million of our motor fuel tax money is leveraging everything we can get from there. Is it true that every CID is basically competing with other projects inside the state then? Because that money is basically limited. It's capped at some dollar. You're not getting federal money from another source. Is it not coming out of that same federal
Well, we have
Motor
the,
fuel tax or
through the
highway
Atlanta
trust
Regional Commission, you know, we have the programs that allow us to apply for the LCI and several grants, and those are federally funded.
Right.
So your point about, yes, are we all competing, the Metro CIDs are all competing for those grant cycles. With the SERTA fund that's now been expanded, and we appreciate the legislature to expand that incrementally every year, those grants are competitive among the applications. Now it's statewide. I understand it's also for local governments within that grant fund. So we you know, as CIDs, if there's some creative ways to dedicate funds that allow us, when we are project delivery ready and we have equity on the table, that's a good investment because it saves 100% of the taxpayer's liability. You've got a partner that's delivering and executing on the projects.
So basically, your people are trying to help themselves.
Yes.
They
So
bring
growing those
the
resources.
match in. The businesses, they pay the extra tax to get that leverage, and so it's working.
Right.
Thank you.
Ms. Williams, you have stirred it up. You know, hold on. You got another, Ms. Williams? Hold on. You stirred it up, see? I almost let you off. Chairman Hamilton.
Thank you. No, I actually, you'll enjoy this, I think.
Yes, thank you.
You know, the CID, the CID that we passed this previous year and that we're in the process of, it did exactly that. And where we had a $40 million project in the CID, in rough numbers, and the CID is going to come up with about 10 or 12 million of the 40 million, and through some federal earmarks that were created years ago and some state money, we're going to have a very successful, great project that's going to drive economic development in our community that, quite honestly, if we've not come together with all those things, would not be happening. And I love what Senator Gooch said, because that's what I said earlier, and I think ought to be part of this as we continue to fund this, that help those that help themselves. And so I think that in those communities where that they are able to, whether it be a CID, whether it be some other funding mechanism, the $200 million bond project that our county's looking at, you know, those are true efforts of helping ourselves, and in many cases, those are local dollars going into state roads. And I would like to think that there's an incentive there to do more of those so that the state would want to participate, because it's costing the state less money because we're doing that. And I applaud what you've done there, and that's the kind of vision I think that we need in this planning model, because I'll go public with this. The way we've been doing it is just no longer going to do it for us. The state of Georgia is going to be, in my opinion, is really going to start suffering. The perfect storm has occurred, and if we don't find some new revenue streams, call it what you want to, but new revenue streams, I think, and for those that think that they're taxed enough already, I think $85 a year certainly is not a whole lot of transportation tax to be paying. So I appreciate what you've done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, you done now. I know you keep looking back. We're going to revert back. Mr. May has come in, so from DeKalb County.
Good afternoon. Again, I'm Lee May. I'm the interim CEO in DeKalb County, and thank you all for indulging me just for a few moments here this afternoon. I'm here just to let you know a little bit about DeKalb. Some of you all, I think, may have been born in DeKalb County. The more I talk to the leadership and those legislators here, I realize DeKalb County is home for a lot of people. In DeKalb County, we're 400 miles behind in repaving roads. We've calculated that it will take $125 million just to address the infrastructure, the crumbling infrastructure that we have now. We're not able to repave roads, and so this last budget cycle, I put an additional $1 million in place to just fill potholes. That's a Band-Aid over a gaping wound. And in DeKalb County, we have been visionaries in this region. We were one of the founding members of the Atlanta Regional Commission. We are one of 2 counties, of course, that fund Grady Memorial Hospital. Just met with the CEO and chair of the corporation last week, and they kindly reminded me that we probably are not paying our fair share. for the amount of service that is delivered to DeKalb County residents in need. But we still invest approximately $20 million roughly between our debt service and just our operational infrastructure investment there. We, again, are one of two partners with in MARTA. We put forward with our 1% sales tax, roughly $100 million a year to support the regional transit system that we all have. Saw Keith Parker here earlier, and he's doing a phenomenal job in leading that organization. So as we have been visionaries, there have been dramatic impacts on our ability to invest long-term in our county's infrastructure. We literally are addressing our infrastructure piecemeal, just street by street. We score all of our streets. We inspected about 2,000 miles of our roads last year, and with that, we know with great certainty what our needs are. In addition to that, we must expand our transit system. That's something that has been highly discussed throughout the county and the region, the Clifton Corridor line and the I-20 corridor as well. Two major projects that not just has an effect on DeKalb County, but has regional impacts. Clifton Corridor being a major, I would suggest one of the most important employment centers in our region. And the I-20 corridor, which literally supports or feeds into 5 to 6 different counties. A lot of times you think I-20, you think South DeKalb County, but it feeds into South Gwinnett County. It feeds into Rockdale County. The chairman of Rockdale is here with us today. It feeds into Newton and even Walton County and Henry County as well. So these are regional projects. But of course we have a reality of a shortage of funding. So I'm here just to encourage, to employ, to even beg if need be, for you all to do what I've heard today is encouraging, that you all have listened to the comments that have been raised, but I've heard you all's comments as well in wanting to really provide a substantive solution to the transit funding of our infrastructure. And I'm here to say that we in DeKalb County are here to be partners with you all, to lend our input on the front end of it, not just after a resolution has been brought forward. I'm so excited to have our leader with ACCG, Ross King, to be a part of it so that you can hear really from the standpoint of counties, the county standpoint, and what this really means to us. In DeKalb County, we more than are willing, ready to pay for investments, as long as we know that we will get a return on that investment. And I think that we can all say that if we invest in this through whatever tax that we have to increase, adjust, maneuver, that we are willing in DeKalb County to stand forward with y'all and doing that. So any committee, any small group, any large group that you want me or any other of my colleagues in DeKalb County to participate in, we are more than willing and ready to be a part of that. And I'll just end with this. On this last legislative session, we brought forward an exemption to our sales tax. We are at our sales tax cap because of our support of MARTA, and because we are one of two counties as well, Rockdale being the other, that has a host tax, which is a property tax credit. So you look at our millage rate, the property tax liability of our citizens is not what the millage rate says it is. We give a property tax credit so that their actual payment in property taxes is roughly 50%, depending on how the sales taxes are coming each year. But because of MARTA tax and the host tax, we are at our sales tax cap. And so this last session, we asked for an exemption in DeKalb County that would have allowed us to put forward to have a SPLOS. We're one of the few counties in the state that doesn't have either a SPLOS or a LOS. And Ross can tell me who the ones are probably on one hand, but we are one of the few that don't have that ability. So we asked for an exemption so that we can address for ourselves our transportation infrastructure. We did that because we didn't know what's going to come from this body in terms of a statewide solution or even a regional solution. We're going to continue to come back with that just in case. My hope and prayer is that there's a solution that is brought forward by this body here under the Gold Dome. But we in DeKalb County are in tremendous need. This investment is a quality of space issue, it's a quality of life issue, and it's an economic development issue for us. In DeKalb County, we have probably the robust amount of highway infrastructure, interstate infrastructure in DeKalb County with 285, 85, and I-20 and 675 coming through at some point throughout DeKalb County. So we are a regional player in need of a regional solution to move us forward. So without further ado, I just want to thank you all for indulging me this moment, and thank you for the work, the tough work that you all have to do moving forward. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have for me.
Thank you, Mr. May. Any questions?
You know, I can only say that we've worked hard to create city governments to go into DeKalb County over the last 4 years.
Yes, you
help
have.
you out. So
yes, you have.
Colleagues up here.
And I would love to respond to that right now, but that's a different committee. That's a different committee.
Yeah, let's hold off on that one right now.
Fayette County's next, though, is what I would say.
No, Fayette's done been. You missed them. The Dean of the House.
What was your splosh, Mr. Chairman, the one that you just mentioned that you were...
The host tax?
Yes.
That is a property tax credit program that we have. It's for homesteaded properties for individuals. And so the 1 penny that is raised for that credits about $100 million worth of the total tax obligation for our residents.
And when did y'all reach the threshold on the max?
The 7%. When
Yes.
we
Do you remember?
20 plus years ago when host was approved by the.
So you've been at the threshold since that time?
Yeah, and there's no sunshine. There's no sunset on that either. It's ongoing. So unless there's an adjustment made to the threshold or allowing us to have an exemption in the cab, we have our hands tied.
Wow. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
coming.
you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Co-Chair.
These two up here now are conspiring. They're laughing about something. They may have been involved in all that. No, I wasn't. Okay. We, as I stated earlier when I gave you the dates, Chairman Gooch and I had sit down and we had tried to work these things out, but as always, as I said, they were subject to change, and one already has. So, but at the request, the Dean of the House, our Columbus date is going to be on August 18th instead of the 25th. The mayor and the DOT board member from there are both going to be out of the country on a trip to basically promote Columbus, and we want them to be able to do that, and we don't want them to not be able to be there when we go. So with that, we are going to move that date from August 25th to the 18th. We'll get that out. We will also, especially any members that's not on this committee, if y'all want the PDF of the GDOT's presentation, if you'll let us know, we'll make sure that Tracy makes sure that y'all get that.
Real quick.
Sure. I'm sorry, Senator Beach. Sure. August the 18th now in Columbus, September the 2nd in Tifton, September 3rd in Macon, September 30th in Augusta, October 1st in Savannah, October 28th in Rome, and October the 29th in Blue Ridge. Now there again, those could be subject to change, but we do. We may change up as we move through some of these others. When we'll.
I just know the second is the day after Labor Day, so a little bit later start.
It's not that far from me. Y'all get a little dose of what we're going through on that one, don't you? I'm just playing. 7:30. We usually get up early down there. No, that's a good point. That's a good point. We'll look at adjusting that. Yeah. We'll look at it. We'll look at maybe trying to adjust that a little bit for y'all. You ain't been recognized. No, but we will. We will try to look at that. With that being said, I'm going to say that I thank each and every one of you today for your comments, for being here. We look forward to hearing from you again as we move this process forward, and we truly want to hear from the people, and that's why we've set this up. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chairman Gooch.
I'll echo those same comments. But before I do, I'd like to say that I've known Ross King for 14 years. I've never seen him sit in a room so long and say nothing. So, Ross, I hope you come out of your shell before this year is over. I am blessed. I bet. You have to keep notes. Also, I'd like to thank Seth Milliken in the back room for all his efforts to try to put this group together, and the Georgia Transportation Alliance, Georgia Chamber of Commerce. But Seth, stand up for a second. I understand today is Seth's birthday. He's 31 years old. Happy birthday.
You were behind the pole. Some of the members want you to step around where they can see you.
Come around.
I don't really think y'all do. I want y'all to see you.
Thank you all, and we want to continue the dialogue. Please give us your input. We need your ideas, and we'll look forward to the next meeting.
Thank y'all. We'll adjourn.